Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where curiosity takes its time and ideas arrive as quietly as a late visitor, knocking on the door of your thoughts. Tonight, we're exploring something that every living creature carries with them, sometimes hidden, sometimes loud, and sometimes so deeply woven into daily life that you forget it's there at all. It waits in the background when you're calm, it surges forward when the unexpected happens, and it shapes the way you walk through the world. We're talking about fear. Not just the kind you feel when you hear a loud noise in the middle of the night, or when you see a shadow move where it shouldn't. We're going to look at fear in all its forms. The quick, sharp kind that makes you jump. The slow, simmering kind that keeps you restless. The ancient instincts passed down over millions of years, and the quiet dread that lives in the corners of human thought. But before we wander too far into the shadows, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you in bed, the lights low, your body sinking into the mattress? Maybe you're sitting somewhere comfortable, the day's work behind you, the air still. Wherever you are, can you remember the last time you felt afraid? Not just startled, but truly afraid. The kind of feeling that moved through your whole body, tightened your chest, made your thoughts rush. Was it a real danger, or just a thought your mind wouldn't let go of? Fear has a way of blurring that line. If you find the sound of this slow journey comforting, if you enjoy the way we take these complex ideas and let them unfold without hurry, you might consider liking the video or subscribing to this little corner of calm. It helps these quiet conversations find others who might need them. But for now, keep your focus here, with me, as we take our first steps into understanding why fear can be so powerful, why it can arrive without warning, and why in so many ways you can't ever fully escape it. Fear is one of the most universal experiences in the natural world. It doesn't matter whether you're a human living in a city, a bird startled by a predator's shadow, or a mouse hearing the soft pad of paws behind it. The sensation comes with its own distinct set of reactions, and it's built deep into the wiring of life. It is older than civilization, older than speech, older than the idea of safety itself. In humans, it's the result of an intricate system in the brain and body, but it started long before there were brains like ours. Early life forms needed some way to tell if they were in danger and to respond fast enough to survive. Over time, what began as a simple survival reflex became the complex, layered emotion we know now. When you think about fear, it's tempting to imagine it as a single thing, one uniform sensation. But that's not quite true. It's a mix of many processes happening at once: perception, interpretation, physical change, and memory. And all of them work together almost instantly. You don't have to consciously decide to be afraid. Your body will do most of it without asking your permission. That's why, in the moment, it feels like fear is in control instead of you. Your muscles tense before you've had time to reason through what's happening. Your breathing changes, your eyes widen, sharpening your vision in the direction of whatever caught your attention. And this is where the story becomes more than just biology. Fear isn't only about danger in the present, it's also about what you've experienced before, what you expect might happen, and even what you've never experienced at all but still somehow know to avoid. You can fear something you've never actually faced. You might be wary of a deep body of water even if you've never been in one. You might keep your distance from certain animals you've only ever seen in pictures. This ability to imagine threats that aren't physically present is part of what makes human fear so persistent. It also means that fear can outlive its original purpose. A sudden reaction to a loud noise makes sense if that noise signals danger, but in modern life it might just be a car backfiring outside. The reaction is the same, but the cause is harmless. The brain and body don't always make that distinction immediately, because the cost of a false alarm is low compared to the cost of ignoring a real threat. If you jump at a shadow that turns out to be nothing, you've only lost a moment of calm. If you ignore a shadow that hides danger, the risk could be much greater. What's interesting is how quickly fear can move between people. Humans are social animals, and the signs of fear in one person can trigger it in others even before they know why. This isn't limited to humans. Many animals display similar group reactions. In a flock of birds, one startled member can send the entire group into the air. In a crowd of people, a sudden movement or sound can cause dozens to flinch or turn their heads all at once. This rapid spread of fear responses helped our ancestors survive situations where one set of eyes or ears detected danger before the others. It's also part of why fear can seem so contagious today, even when the danger isn't immediate. You've probably noticed how fear can also be shaped by stories. The things you've been told to watch out for, the warnings you've heard from parents, friends, or even strangers. All of these become part of the library your brain searches through when it decides whether to sound the alarm. This is one reason cultural differences can shape what people fear most. In some parts of the world, fear of certain animals is common because those animals have historically been dangerous in that region. In other places, fear might center on entirely different risks, shaped by geography, history, or even popular media. That's not to say that all fear is harmful. Without it, survival would be much harder. The key is in how it's managed. In nature, fear often fades once the danger has passed, allowing the body to return to a normal state. In humans, the memory of fear can linger much longer, and it can resurface even when nothing around you is threatening. You might feel your heart race at a sound that reminds you of a past scare, or tense up when you see something that matches a dangerous memory. This ability to remember and predict danger is useful, but it's also the reason fear can be so hard to escape. Some people try to push fear away entirely, to ignore it or suppress it, but the brain doesn't always cooperate. In fact, trying not to think about something can make it more persistent. It's a little like telling yourself not to picture a bright red apple. The thought appears almost instantly. Fear works the same way. The harder you try not to notice it, the more your mind checks to see if it's still there, and in checking, you keep it alive. There's also the matter of how fear can hide inside other feelings. Sometimes it arrives disguised as anger, caution, or even excitement. A person who reacts with irritation in a tense situation may actually be afraid, but the emotion shows itself in a different form. This is why fear can be so complex to untangle. It's not always obvious, even to the person experiencing it, and it doesn't always match the outward signs we expect. When we think about escaping fear, we often imagine removing the source. If the thing that scares us goes away, so will the fear. But in reality, fear can survive without the original trigger. A person who was bitten by a dog years ago may still feel uneasy around all dogs, even ones that pose no danger. In that way, fear becomes a pattern the brain follows rather than a direct response to current conditions. And patterns, once formed, can be difficult to break. It's worth remembering that fear doesn't only come from obvious dangers. It can also arise from uncertainty, from situations where the outcome is unknown. Waiting for medical results, starting a new job, speaking in public for the first time, none of these involve immediate physical harm, but they can still produce the same tightening in the chest, the same restless thoughts, the same sense that something might go wrong. Humans are wired to respond not only to what is happening, but to what could happen, and that means fear can thrive even in the absence of threat. What makes fear even more persistent is its connection to learning. The brain remembers fearful experiences more strongly than neutral ones. This is partly because of how adrenaline and other chemicals affect memory formation. In an evolutionary sense, it's a useful adaptation. Remembering danger means you can avoid it in the future, but it also means that frightening moments can be harder to forget than calmer ones, and they can shape behavior long after the danger has gone. Even when people know their fear isn't logical, the feeling itself doesn't just vanish. You can tell yourself that a harmless spider won't hurt you, but your body might still react as if it could. That's because the fear response is designed to be faster than logic. By the time you've reminded yourself of the facts, the body has already reacted. In some cases, repeated exposure to the feared thing in safe conditions can help the brain relearn its response. But this takes time and patience. The more you look at fear, the more it becomes clear that escaping it entirely isn't really possible. It's part of the architecture of the mind, built over countless generations. You can change how you respond to it. You can understand it better. You can even use it as motivation in certain situations. But the capacity for fear itself remains. It's as much a part of life as the need to eat or sleep. And so, as we move forward in this conversation, we'll look closer at how fear operates, not just in humans but in other animals, and how it's tied to everything from split-second reactions to the deepest thoughts we try not to face. Because while you can't truly escape fear, you can learn to see it more clearly, and in doing so, perhaps change your relationship with it. When you stop to think about it, fear doesn't have just one form. It doesn't always look like running away or screaming or hiding. Sometimes it's quiet, almost invisible. Sometimes it's loud and unmistakable. And sometimes it's so woven into your everyday choices that you hardly notice it's there. If you imagine it as an object, you might picture sharp edges and dark colours, but in reality it changes shape to match the moment. It can be a sudden jolt, the kind that makes your whole body flinch before you even know why, or it can be a steady weight, pressing down so gently over days or weeks that you forget what it felt like not to carry it. In the simplest sense, fear begins with a signal. Something in the environment catches your attention. A sound, a movement, a change in someone's voice, even a thought you've had 100 times before, but that suddenly feels heavier. That signal travels fast. Your senses send the information into the brain, and from there it splits along two paths. One is quick and rough, racing straight to the amygdala, the almond-shaped set of structures buried deep inside the brain that acts as an early warning system. The other path takes a slower route through the cortex, where more careful analysis happens. The fast route doesn't bother with details. Its job is to get you ready to act before you've even decided what you're reacting to. This dual pathway is why fear can feel so sudden and so complete. The fast route primes your muscles, quickens your heartbeat, and sharpens your senses almost immediately. The slower route catches up a moment later to decide whether the reaction is actually needed. If it is, the fear response continues. If it isn't, the system winds down, though not always as quickly as you might like. This is why you can still feel your pulse racing long after you realize there was no real danger. The body doesn't stop on a dime. The shape of fear isn't just about speed, though. It's also about scale. There's the acute kind, the burst of adrenaline when something unexpected happens, and there's the chronic kind, which can stay with you like background noise. Acute fear is what you feel when you nearly trip down the stairs or hear a loud crash outside your window. It rises sharply, then falls away once the moment passes. Chronic fear is slower and more persistent, tied to ongoing stressors, a demanding job, a long-term illness, or an unresolved conflict. It might not spike in the same way, but it drains you over time. What's striking is how both forms come from the same basic systems. The body doesn't create a new mechanism for different situations. It uses the same tools, changes in heart rate, breathing, muscle tension and hormone release, but in different patterns. In short bursts, these changes are protective. Over long periods, they can wear you down. That's one of the costs of fear that's hard to see in the moment. You might think you've adapted, but your body is still keeping a low-level readiness that takes energy away from other processes like digestion, immunity, and even sleep quality. Another way fear shifts shape is in how it connects to memory. The amygdala doesn't work alone. It has strong ties to the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. This connection helps you remember the details of fearful events more vividly than neutral ones. In evolutionary terms, that makes sense. You want to remember where the danger was so you can avoid it in the future. But the vividness can also make the memory feel immediate, even years later. A smell, a sound, or a setting. can trigger the same physical reaction you had during the original moment, even if the present situation is completely safe. Fear also changes depending on whether it's something you've learned or something you were born ready to feel. There are certain dangers humans seem naturally prepared to notice. Snakes, for example, or the sight of a face showing anger. These responses are thought to be shaped by many generations of survival pressure. Other fears are learned through experience or observation. If a child sees a parent react strongly to spiders, they may adopt the same reaction even without a direct negative experience. This is how fear can be passed socially, not just biologically. Social fears add another dimension to its shape. They don't involve immediate physical danger but can feel just as real to the body. Fear of rejection, embarrassment, or failure can activate the same stress responses as more tangible threats. The brain reacts to social threats because, in our evolutionary past, belonging to a group was essential for survival. Being excluded carried real risks, so the systems that respond to danger also respond to signs of social disapproval. Even in a modern world where survival doesn't depend as directly on group acceptance, the old wiring remains. One of the more complicated forms fear can take is when it mixes with anticipation. This is where anxiety lives, in the space between what's happening and what might happen. The body's alarm systems can activate even when the threat is entirely hypothetical, running scenarios over and over in the mind as if repetition could somehow prepare you. Sometimes this does help. Rehearsing a response can make you more ready, but often it just keeps the body in a heightened state, wearing down the same systems that acute danger would, only without the release that comes when the threat is over. Fear also adapts to culture. In some societies, certain animals, locations, or situations are universally feared because they've historically been dangerous in that region. In others, those same things might be neutral or even revered. Cultural stories, myths, and shared experiences can give fear specific shapes that don't exist elsewhere. Urban legends, cautionary tales, and even local news cycles can feed into this, reinforcing particular dangers in the collective mind of a community. Technology has added yet another layer. We now encounter more potential threats through screens than through direct experience. News, social media, and entertainment all have the power to trigger fear responses, sometimes without context. A short clip of a dangerous event can activate the same systems as seeing it in person, especially if it matches something you already consider a risk. The brain's fear circuits don't always distinguish between a real, present danger and a recorded one, especially in the first moments of perception. Interestingly, fear can also take a form that people actively seek out. Horror movies, haunted houses, extreme sports. These experiences are designed to trigger the body's alarm systems in controlled environments. The appeal comes partly from the rush of adrenaline, but also from the contrast between the feeling of danger and the knowledge that you're actually safe. The same systems that evolved to keep us alive can, in certain situations, become a source of excitement or entertainment. This doesn't mean the fear is fake. Your body reacts as if the danger is real, but your mind knows it's contained, and that changes how you interpret the experience. Some forms of fear are harder to define because they're not tied to a specific object or situation. These are the more existential fears: awareness of mortality, uncertainty about the future, or the realization of how little control we have over some aspects of life. They don't trigger a sprint or a fight. Instead, they can linger quietly, influencing choices and moods in ways that are subtle but persistent. This kind of fear often hides behind other emotions, and addressing it can require deep reflection rather than quick action. Whatever form it takes, fear is not random. It follows patterns shaped by biology, experience, and environment. Its ability to change shape is part of why it's so effective as a survival tool, but also why it's so difficult to eliminate entirely. Even when one form fades, another can take its place. A person might overcome a fear of flying but develop a fear of crowded spaces. The underlying system remains ready, shifting its focus as needed. Recognizing the shape fear takes in a given moment can be the first step toward understanding it. Noticing whether it's acute or chronic, learned or instinctive, physical or social, can help you respond in a way that's more measured. But awareness doesn't erase it. The systems that create fear are older than human reasoning, and they operate whether or not you approve of their timing. And so fear continues to change its form, moving from one moment to the next, adapting to new situations, responding to both real and imagined threats. It can be a shadow, a weight, a spark, or a wave. And sometimes it can be all of those within the same day. It's not always welcome, but it is always ready, and its ability to change shape is part of what makes it a constant presence in life. When something catches your attention in a way that feels urgent, the first part of you to truly register it isn't your thoughts or your logic. It's a small, deeply buried set of structures in the brain that's been doing the same job for millions of years. It sits in a position that's almost perfect for its role, right near the center, close to pathways carrying sensory information from your eyes, ears, and other senses. This is the amygdala, and it could be described as your internal lookout post, always scanning for signs of trouble. It never really takes a break, even when you're asleep. The amygdala's job is to be fast, not thorough. When a sound, image, or sensation arrives that might signal danger, the amygdala doesn't wait to see if it's definitely a threat. It sends a message to the rest of the brain and body to prepare. This is what makes you jump at sudden noises or tense when you think you've seen movement in the corner of your eye. The system is biased toward action rather than inaction, because in evolutionary terms, it's better to react quickly to something harmless than to hesitate when faced with real danger. That's why you might later laugh at yourself for overreacting. But in the moment, the system isn't built for humor, it's built for survival. The amygdala works closely with another important structure, the hypothalamus. This is where the signal begins to branch out into the body systems, triggering the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. These chemicals quickly change how your body is functioning. Your heart beats faster, your breathing deepens, and energy is redirected toward muscles that might need to act. At the same time, certain processes that aren't immediately necessary, like digestion, are temporarily slowed down. It's not a conscious decision, it's automatic. Information also moves to the brain stem, which controls many of the body's involuntary functions. This is part of why the fear response can feel so complete. It's not just your thoughts changing, it's your heart rate, your breathing, your muscle tone, even the way your pupils adjust to take in more light. Your body becomes a coordinated system focused on one thing, preparing for whatever might come next. While the amygdala is acting quickly, another route sends the same incoming information to the sensory cortex and prefrontal cortex. These areas process details more slowly and carefully, checking the signal against stored memories and reasoning through whether the response is truly needed. This slower path is what allows you to calm down after realizing that the shadow you saw was just a coat on a chair, or that the noise you heard was a door closing in the wind. The quick path gets you ready. The slow path tells you whether to stay that way. One of the reasons fear can be so persistent is that the amygdala's influence on the rest of the brain is strong. Even when the slower reasoning parts of the brain conclude there's no danger, the physical changes set in motion by the amygdala can take minutes to fully subside. Your heart might keep pounding, your muscles might stay tense, and your mind might remain alert for other possible threats. This lingering readiness is part of why a single scare can leave you feeling uneasy long after it's over. The amygdala doesn't just react to the present moment, it also plays a role in storing memories of emotional events. When something frightening happens, the connection between the amygdala and the hippocampus strengthens, making it easier to recall that event later. This is useful when the memory helps you avoid danger in the future. but it can also mean that certain fears are reinforced each time you recall them. If you've ever felt your pulse quicken just thinking about a past event, that's the amygdala doing its job long after the moment has passed. Not all fear responses start in the same way. Sometimes the amygdala reacts to information coming from the senses, but other times it responds to thoughts generated internally. You can trigger the same physical reactions by imagining a threatening situation as you would by actually seeing one unfold. This is part of why worrying can feel so physically exhausting. The body doesn't always distinguish between real and imagined threats when the amygdala is involved. In certain situations, the amygdala's activity can be measured directly through brain imaging. Studies show that even subtle cues, like seeing a fearful expression on someone else's face, can cause it to light up. This sensitivity is one reason fear spreads so quickly between people. If your brain detects fear in someone else, it can prime you to be on alert before you consciously know why. In groups, this can create rapid chain reactions, where one person's startled response triggers a wave of readiness through everyone nearby. Another player in this system is the periaqueductal gray, or PAG, located in the midbrain. This area is heavily involved in coordinating defensive behaviors once a threat is detected. Depending on the situation, it can contribute to freezing in place, fleeing, or preparing to fight. The decision about which response to choose isn't entirely conscious. It's shaped by the nature of the threat, past experiences, and immediate environmental factors. For example, if escape seems possible, the system might favour running. If not, freezing or defensive action might take over. It's worth noting that these responses happen incredibly fast, often within fractions of a second. By the time you're aware of what's happening, much of the initial processing has already been done. This speed is the result of countless generations of refinement. An organism that reacts even slightly faster than another has a better chance of survival. In this way, the human fear response is part of a much older system shared across many species. The brain's alert system is also adaptable. Repeated exposure to a specific threat can change how strongly the amygdala responds. In some cases, the response becomes weaker, as the brain learns the situation is not as dangerous as it first seemed. In others, the response can become stronger, especially if the threat is unpredictable or has caused harm in the past. This flexibility helps explain why some fears fade over time, while others grow more intense. There are also situations where the amygdala is overactive, responding to harmless stimuli as if they were dangerous. This can happen in anxiety disorders, where the threshold for triggering the alarm is lower than average. In these cases, the brain's alert system is functioning as if the world is full of constant immediate threats, even in the absence of real danger. The result can be a nearly continuous state of readiness that wears down the body over time. On the other hand, there are rare cases where damage to the amygdala reduces or eliminates fear responses. People with certain neurological conditions may not experience the same automatic reactions to threatening situations. While this might sound appealing at first, it comes with significant risks, as the lack of an early warning system makes it harder to avoid genuine danger. Fear, for all its discomfort, is an important protective mechanism. The brain doesn't operate in isolation when it comes to fear. The endocrine system, particularly the adrenal glands, plays a crucial role in maintaining the state of alert. Once the hypothalamus signals the adrenal glands, adrenaline enters the bloodstream, producing many of the physical changes associated with fear. Faster heart rate, increased blood pressure, and heightened awareness. Cortisol follows, helping to keep the body ready for action over a longer period. These hormones work alongside the neural circuits to sustain the state of readiness until the brain decides it's no longer needed. While the amygdala is often described as the center of fear, it's more accurate to think of it as one part of a network. The prefrontal cortex helps regulate its responses, either amplifying or calming them depending on the context. The hippocampus provides memory input, helping to decide whether a current situation matches past dangers. The insula processes internal bodily states, contributing to the awareness of fear's physical sensations. Together, these regions form an integrated system that shapes how you experience and respond to potential threats. What's remarkable is how much of this system operates without conscious input. You don't decide to widen your eyes, quicken your breathing, or tense your muscles in response to a possible threat. These changes happen before conscious thought has the chance to intervene. Only afterward do you begin to analyze the situation and decide what to do next. In many cases, the body's initial reaction is over before the mind has fully understood the cause. This deep integration between brain and body is part of why fear feels so compelling. It doesn't stay in the realm of ideas. It takes hold physically, altering the way you breathe, see, and move. The brain on alert is not simply thinking about danger. It is preparing every system under its control to deal with it. Whether the threat turns out to be real or imagined, the process is the same, and the effect can linger long after the moment passes. Once the brain has decided that something might be dangerous, the message can't stay in one place. It has to move, quickly and efficiently, to the rest of the body. The amygdala may start the chain reaction, but without a network to carry its orders, the preparation for action would never reach the muscles, the heart, or the lungs. This is where the nervous system steps in, a branching, high-speed communication network that links every part of you, from the smallest skin receptors to the deep core muscles that might need to move you out of harm's way. The first path these messages often take is through the autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetic branch. This is the part responsible for initiating the fight or flight response, though it's not limited to just fighting or running. The sympathetic nervous system works like a rapid delivery service, sending out instructions without waiting for conscious thought. It operates through a combination of electrical impulses and chemical messengers, ensuring that signals move both instantly and in a way that can be sustained for longer periods if needed. Electrical signals travel down nerve fibers from the brain and spinal cord to various target organs. In some cases, these signals trigger immediate changes. The heart begins to beat faster, the airways widen, the muscles in the limbs receive increased blood flow. In others, the signals prompt the release of hormones into the bloodstream, spreading the message to tissues and organs that aren't directly connected to the nervous system by physical nerves. This dual method, electrical and chemical, means the body can react on two timescales, almost instantly through nerve signals and over minutes or hours through hormones. One of the first major targets of this system is the adrenal medulla, the inner part of the adrenal glands that sit just above the kidneys. When activated, the adrenal medulla releases adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream. These hormones bind to receptors throughout the body, amplifying and sustaining the changes already begun by direct nerve signals. The combination of faster heart rate, increased blood pressure, and redirected blood flow means the muscles can work harder, the brain can process faster, and the senses can pick up more information from the environment. At the same time, the digestive system slows down. Energy that would normally go toward processing food is diverted to the muscles and brain. The pupils dilate to let in more light, improving vision in low-light conditions. Sweat glands activate, helping to cool the body in case prolonged exertion becomes necessary. All of these changes are coordinated to support one goal: keeping you alive in the face of a possible threat. The mist in these messages is the chemical communication, the way hormones spread through the bloodstream touching nearly every organ. Unlike nerve signals, which travel along set pathways, hormones move everywhere, creating a general state of readiness. This is why you can still feel the effects of a scare minutes after you've realized there's no danger. The adrenaline in your system takes time to break down, and until it does, your body remains partially on alert. Another important messenger in this process is cortisol, released by the adrenal cortex under the direction of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis. This pathway starts with the hypothalamus releasing corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, which signals the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. ACTH then travels to the adrenal cortex, prompting it to release cortisol. Cortisol helps maintain the supply of glucose in the blood, ensuring that the brain and muscles have enough energy for prolonged activity. While adrenaline is about immediate action, cortisol is about endurance, keeping the body ready if the situation lasts more than a few seconds. This whole system is remarkably efficient, but it's not without costs. If it's activated too often or for too long, the constant presence of stress hormones can start to damage tissues, disrupt sleep, weaken the immune system, and interfere with digestion. In situations where real danger is frequent, this trade-off makes sense. Survival in the moment outweighs long-term health. But in modern life, where many perceived threats are ongoing and not physically dangerous, the system can be triggered repeatedly without the release of physical action, leading to wear and tear over time. The speed of the initial message is one of the most impressive parts of the process. In some animals, the reaction from sensing a predator to initiating escape can happen in less than 1/10 of a second. In humans, the delay is slightly longer but still incredibly fast. A loud, unexpected sound can cause muscle contractions before you're fully aware of hearing it. This is because the pathway from the ears to the brainstem and then to the spinal cord is shorter and faster than the path to the higher brain centers that would interpret the sound. The nervous system also allows for localized reflexes that don't require full brain processing. For example, touching something hot makes you pull your hand back before the sensation even reaches your conscious mind. While this isn't exactly the same as fear, it shows how the body prioritizes speed in protective responses. In fear-related situations, similar reflexive movements can happen, ducking, turning away, or stepping back before you've thought about it. Communication isn't one way. Once the body's on alert, sensory information flows back to the brain, updating it on the current state of the environment and the body itself. This feedback loop allows for adjustments. If the threat is getting closer, the system can increase readiness. If it's fading, the body can begin to return to baseline. The brain is constantly balancing incoming data with the body's current state, adjusting hormone levels, muscle readiness, and sensory focus. The parasympathetic nervous system plays an important role here as well. It's the counterpart to the sympathetic system, responsible for calming the body down after the threat has passed. Its signals slow the heart rate, resume digestion, and lower blood pressure. However, the parasympathetic system doesn't simply switch on when the sympathetic switches off. The two operate in a coordinated push and pull, with one taking dominance depending on the situation. This balance is part of what keeps the body functioning smoothly, allowing it to ramp up quickly and calm down when it's safe. Interestingly, the speed and strength of these messages can be influenced by many factors: fatigue, illness, mood, even the time of day. Someone who is already stressed or sleep-deprived may react more strongly to a potential threat because their baseline level of alertness is already high. Hormone levels that fluctuate over the day can also affect how ready the system is to respond. For example, cortisol levels are naturally higher in the morning, which may make some people more reactive to stress earlier in the day. There's also evidence that practice and experience can shape these responses. Soldiers, firefighters, and other professionals who regularly face dangerous situations often show changes in how their nervous systems respond. In some cases, the initial spike in alertness is reduced, allowing for clearer thinking and more deliberate action. This doesn't mean they don't feel fear, but their systems have adapted to function more effectively in its presence. At the other extreme, repeated exposure to uncontrollable stress can make the system more sensitive, causing it to trigger more easily and take longer to return to baseline. This heightened reactivity can make everyday situations feel threatening, even when they're not. Over time, this can contribute to anxiety disorders, where the brain's threshold for activating the fear response becomes unusually low. Even in ordinary life, the messages in this network are constantly being sent and received, sometimes at a low level that you barely notice. Walking alone at night might raise your alertness slightly, sharpening your hearing and making you more aware of movement around you. Entering a busy intersection might make your heart beat a little faster, preparing you to react if a car moves unexpectedly. These are examples of the same system at work, just at a lower intensity than in moments of acute fear. The key point is that the system is always ready. It doesn't power down completely because danger, in some form, is always possible. What changes is the intensity and scope of the messages, how loudly they're sent, how widely they spread through the body, and how long they last. This readiness is what makes it possible for you to react quickly when something unexpected happens, even if you were relaxed just moments before. When the body's alert systems are fully engaged, one of the most curious effects is how it changes the way you sense time. Moments that might normally pass without much notice can seem to stretch, each second feeling longer than it should. This isn't an illusion in the casual sense. You're not imagining it. It's a shift in how your brain processes incoming information, and it happens because the same systems that prime you for action also sharpen your focus on the present. Under normal circumstances, the brain doesn't record every detail of every moment. It would be far too much information to store and process. Instead, it takes in the essentials, builds a general picture of what's happening, and fills in the rest based on experience and expectation. But in situations where the stakes feel higher, when there's a potential threat or sudden change, that filter becomes much less selective. The brain begins to store more details, more sensory input, more fragments of sound, sight, and movement. One of the key areas involved here is the locus coeruleus, a small nucleus in the brainstem that releases norepinephrine. This chemical increases arousal and attention, making neurons in various parts of the brain more responsive to incoming signals. At the same time, the amygdala becomes more active, flagging events as emotionally significant. Together, these systems ensure that what's happening right now gets top priority in both perception and memory. The effect on time perception comes from the way these moments are processed and later recalled. In the middle of an intense experience, a near accident, a sudden fall, an unexpected loud sound, your brain's heightened attention makes the moment feel dense with information. Later, when you think back on it, the sheer number of details stored gives the impression that the event must have taken longer than it actually did. The physical time measured by a clock hasn't changed, but your mental record of it is thicker, fuller, and so it feels stretched. Experiments have tried to test this in controlled ways. In one type of study, participants are exposed to a sudden intense stimulus, such as being dropped into freefall for a few seconds. While falling, they're asked to judge the duration of a visual display, something like a flickering number sequence, compared to when they're calm. The results consistently show that people believe the sequence lasted longer during the intense experience, even though the actual duration was the same. Interestingly, when tested on their ability to see more quickly, or detect faster flickers in real time, there's no improvement. This suggests that time doesn't literally slow down in the moment. Instead, the feeling comes from memory, from how much richer the recording of the moment is. This also explains why fear-related memories can be so vivid. If you've ever replayed a moment of danger in your mind and found it difficult to stop, you've experienced this firsthand. The brain prioritizes these events because remembering them could be important for survival in the future. The intensity of the experience makes it harder for the memory to fade, and the altered perception of time during the event reinforces the sense that it was significant. The same mechanism can operate in situations that aren't physically dangerous but still highly charged. Public speaking, performing in front of a large audience, taking an important exam. These can all produce the kind of heightened attention and increased detail storage that make minutes feel longer. Even something as simple as waiting for a delayed response in a high-stakes conversation can stretch your perception of time. It's worth noting that the effect can also work in the opposite direction. In situations where you're fully absorbed in an engaging task, what psychologists sometimes call a flow state, you may notice time passing more quickly than usual. Here, the brain is so focused on the task itself that it doesn't pay much attention to the passage of time. With fewer temporal markers being recorded, looking back makes it feel as if time vanished. In fear or high alert, the opposite is true. The brain marks every moment in detail, creating the impression of extra time. These shifts in perception are tied to how attention is allocated. When you're calm, attention is spread more evenly. You notice the background as well as the foreground, and your brain processes the stream of events in a steady, familiar way. When you're on alert, attention narrows sharply, funneling resources toward the most immediate cues. It's a more concentrated form of awareness, one that prioritizes the now over both the past and future. The narrowing of attention also changes how you experience your own body. In moments of fear or sudden stress, you may notice your heartbeat, your breathing, the tension in your muscles in a way you normally wouldn't. These internal signals become part of the heightened sensory input, adding to the density of the moment in memory. The combination of external and internal awareness contributes to the sense that the moment is longer, fuller, and more urgent. Physiologically, the role of adrenaline is significant here. By increasing the firing rate of neurons in certain circuits, adrenaline makes both perception and memory formation more intense. This is useful if you need to remember exactly where you were when something happened or what sequence of events unfolded. It's less useful when the same intensity is applied to situations that aren't truly dangerous, as it can make minor stressors feel disproportionately important in hindsight. Another interesting factor is how expectation influences time perception during fear. If you're anticipating something unpleasant, for example, waiting for a loud noise you know is coming, the seconds leading up to it can feel especially slow. This happens because your brain is rehearsing possible outcomes, keeping your attention locked on the moment of expected impact. Once it arrives, the actual event might feel brief in comparison to the build-up. Chronic exposure to fear or stress can change these dynamics. When the body is in a prolonged state of heightened alert, the perception of time can become distorted in less predictable ways. Some people report that entire days feel slower when they're anxious, while others find that long periods of stress seem to disappear in hindsight, blurring together with few distinct memories. This variation may depend on whether the attention is constantly locked on specific worries or spread across many smaller stressors. The relationship between fear and time also plays a role in how people make decisions under pressure. If time feels extended, it can create a sense that there's more opportunity to act, even if the actual window is small. Conversely, in situations where events happen too quickly to process consciously, the brain may still create a memory that feels stretched, as if there had been more time to think. This can make it difficult to judge how much time you really had during a critical moment. In practical terms, this altered perception can be both helpful and misleading. In emergencies, the brain's ability to store more detail can make it easier to recall what happened later, which might be important for avoiding similar situations or for explaining events to others. On the other hand, it can also make those memories more intrusive, replaying vividly even when you'd prefer to forget them. The same mechanisms that slow time in fearful moments can also heighten learning. When a strong emotional reaction is paired with a specific event, the memory of that event becomes more durable. This is why survival training often involves realistic, high-pressure scenarios. By engaging the systems that alter time perception, the training helps imprint the necessary skills more firmly. The trade-off is that the memory of those scenarios can remain intense long after they're over. Even outside of training or real danger, small time distortions are common. Anyone who's waited for an important phone call or stood in line for something they're nervous about has felt the stretch of minutes. The more your attention stays locked on the upcoming event, the slower those minutes seem to move. Shifting attention away can reduce the effect, but in high alert states that's not always easy to do. It's tempting to think of these shifts as flaws in the brain's design, but they're more accurately side effects of a system tuned for survival. The same heightened processing that can make a moment of fear feel long also makes it possible to notice subtle changes in your environment, to react quickly to threats, and to remember important details later. In most of human history, these benefits would have outweighed any inconvenience caused by distorted time perception. Of course, the modern world offers many situations where the same system activates without a clear survival benefit. Sitting in traffic, waiting for a response to an urgent email, or listening for the results of a medical test can all produce the same sense of stretched time without any immediate physical danger. In these cases, the system is following its programming, heightened attention in the face of uncertainty, but the end result is just a long, tense wait. When the brain decides that something might be dangerous, it doesn't simply note the information and leave it at that. It sets the whole body into motion, activating a coordinated set of changes designed to prepare you for whatever might happen next. This is the body's alarm bell, and once it rings, every major system shifts into a state that favors survival over everything else. The first part of this process happens so quickly that you don't have time to think about it. The amygdala sends its message to the hypothalamus, which acts as the main control center for the autonomic nervous system. Through this system, the hypothalamus sends rapid signals to the adrenal glands, located just above the kidneys. Within seconds, these glands release adrenaline into the bloodstream, carrying the alarm from one part of the body to another with remarkable speed. Adrenaline is one of the most recognizable messengers in the fear response. Once it's circulating, the effects are immediate and widespread. The heart starts beating faster and more forcefully, pumping more blood to the muscles and brain. Blood vessels in the skin and digestive system constrict, redirecting blood to areas that will be most useful for action. Breathing becomes quicker and deeper, drawing in more oxygen to feed muscles that may need to run or fight. The pupils widen to let in more light, improving vision and helping you spot movement or detail in the environment. These changes are not subtle. Even if the trigger is something small, the shift in your body can feel dramatic. You might notice your hands shaking, your mouth going dry, or your skin becoming slightly cooler as blood flow changes. These are all side effects of the body's decision to prioritize movement and alertness over comfort and digestion. Alongside adrenaline, another hormone, noradrenaline, is released. This chemical also increases heart rate and blood pressure, but it plays a more direct role in sharpening attention. In the brain, noradrenaline helps focus mental resources on the most important details, reducing distractions and filtering out less relevant information. This is why you might suddenly notice things you wouldn't have otherwise: a sound in the distance, a flicker of movement, a change in someone's expression. If the situation seems likely to last more than a few seconds, the hypothalamus activates a second pathway, known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This leads to the release of cortisol, a hormone that helps sustain the alert state. Cortisol increases glucose availability in the blood, ensuring that the brain and muscles have a steady supply of energy. It also influences metabolism, immune function, and even memory formation, reinforcing the body's readiness for as long as necessary. While adrenaline's effects peak within minutes, cortisol can keep the system active for hours if needed. This is valuable in situations where the threat isn't immediate but is still present. For example, staying alert while walking through an unfamiliar area at night, or monitoring a potentially dangerous situation from a distance. One of the most important features of the body's alarm system is its ability to prioritize. When it's active, functions that aren't essential for immediate survival are slowed or temporarily suppressed. Digestion slows down, reproductive functions pause, and even processes like tissue repair are delayed. This isn't harmful in the short term. The body can return to normal once the threat has passed. But when the alarm is triggered frequently or for long periods, these interruptions can take a toll on health. In the short term, the alarm system is designed to be as efficient as possible. The muscles receive more blood and oxygen, the brain processes sensory input more quickly, and the body is ready to take action at a moment's notice. In the long term, however, these same processes can become problematic. Prolonged high levels of cortisol can weaken the immune system, raise blood pressure, and disrupt normal sleep patterns. This is why chronic stress can leave you feeling physically run down as well as mentally exhausted. The alarm bell also has a strong connection to memory. The release of adrenaline and cortisol influences the hippocampus and amygdala, making emotionally charged memories more vivid and easier to recall. This is an advantage when the memory is useful for avoiding danger in the future, but it can also make certain experiences harder to forget. In some cases, the memory can be so strong that recalling it later triggers the alarm system again, even in the absence of any real threat. These reactions aren't limited to life or death situations. The same system can activate for far less dramatic reasons, such as an unexpected loud noise, a sudden change in someone's tone of voice, or even a troubling thought. The scale of the response might be smaller, but the pattern is the same. Adrenaline and cortisol prepare the body to respond, while non-essential systems slow down. Physical signs of the alarm system in action are often easy to spot. Rapid heartbeat, quickened breathing, sweating, and changes in posture all point to a body ready to move. In some cases, the reaction includes muscle tremors, which may feel unsettling but are simply the result of increased nerve activity preparing muscles for sudden movement. An interesting aspect of this system is that it doesn't always push toward immediate movement. Sometimes the alarm results in freezing, a state of stillness that allows you to assess the situation without drawing attention. This is especially common when the source of danger isn't fully identified, or when movement might make things worse. In animals, freezing can help avoid detection by predators. In humans, it may be a way to gather more information before committing to a course of action. The balance between moving and freezing is influenced by many factors, including the perceived distance of the threat, past experiences, and even personality traits. Some people tend to react quickly and decisively, while others pause before acting. Both responses can be effective in the right circumstances, and the body's alarm system is capable of supporting either. It's also worth noting that the alarm system doesn't switch off instantly once the danger is gone. Hormones like adrenaline are broken down relatively quickly, but cortisol takes longer to clear from the bloodstream. Even after you've decided you're safe, the lingering effects can keep you feeling tense or uneasy. This gradual return to baseline is part of why it can take time to calm down after a scare, even if the event itself lasted only seconds. The body's alarm system can be influenced by training and repeated exposure. People who regularly face stressful situations, such as emergency responders or athletes in high-pressure sports, often develop more control over their physical reactions. They may still experience the same hormone release and physical changes, but they learn to channel those changes into effective action rather than letting them become overwhelming. On the other hand, repeated exposure to uncontrollable stressors can make the alarm system more sensitive. In these cases, it takes less to trigger the full set of responses, and it may take longer to return to baseline. This heightened sensitivity can contribute to anxiety disorders and make everyday situations feel more threatening than they really are. In some medical conditions, the alarm system becomes dysregulated. This can happen when parts of the brain that control the response, such as the amygdala or prefrontal cortex, are damaged or functioning abnormally. It can also occur when hormone regulation is disrupted, as in certain endocrine disorders. In these situations, the body might overreact or underreact to potential threats, reducing the effectiveness of the system. Despite its occasional downsides, the alarm system remains one of the most important survival tools in the human body. It allows you to react faster than conscious thought would permit, prepares you for a wide range of challenges, and coordinates multiple systems into a unified response. Without it, even simple dangers would be far more difficult to navigate. But this system isn't just about what's happening right now. It's shaped by what has happened before, the fears you've learned, the threats you've faced, and the instincts passed down through generations. The way your body reacts to fear today is the result of a design that's been under construction for far longer than human history. Every step of the alarm system, every reflexive movement, Every hormonal surge is part of a structure that began forming in ancient life, long before there were cities, tools, or even mammals. To understand why certain triggers still hold such power over us, it helps to see fear not as something invented by humans, but as an inheritance from a chain of ancestors that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. In the earliest animals, the ability to detect danger was a matter of sensing changes in the environment, vibrations in the water, shifts in light, changes in pressure. These basic cues were enough to signal that a predator might be near. The organisms that could respond quickly were more likely to survive and pass on their traits. This is the origin of the principle that still shapes fear today. Speed matters more than certainty. Waiting for perfect information was a luxury no early animal could afford. Over time, nervous systems became more complex, allowing for faster processing and more coordinated movement. In fish, for example, specialized nerve cells called Mauthner cells enable rapid escape responses. These cells can trigger a sudden burst of swimming within milliseconds of detecting a threat. While humans no longer have these exact cells, the principle is the same. A direct link from sensing danger to initiating action, bypassing slower, more deliberate processing. As life moved onto land, new challenges emerged. Animals now had to deal with a wider range of predators, more varied environments, and more opportunities for hiding or fleeing. The development of better vision, hearing, and smell increased the range at which threats could be detected. With these new senses came the need for more sophisticated decision-making, whether to freeze, flee, or fight, and how to adapt that choice to different situations. The systems that control human fear today were shaped in part by these ancient pressures, which favoured flexibility as well as speed. Many of the fears that seem instinctive in humans have clear evolutionary roots. A fear of heights, for example, makes sense for a species that could be injured or killed by a fall. Discomfort around snakes or spiders is common even in people who have never been harmed by them, reflecting the dangers these creatures pose to our distant ancestors. Loud, sudden noises have always been potential signals of danger, whether from predators, falling objects, or environmental events like storms. These reactions don't require learning. They are part of a built-in set of responses that has been preserved because it worked. But fear didn't just evolve to protect individuals from predators. It also developed to help social animals protect one another. Early primates, for example, benefited from group living, where the alarm response of one individual could warn the entire group. This is why fear can spread so quickly between humans. The ability to detect fear in another person and respond to it before understanding the cause is an ancient advantage. It allowed early humans and their relatives to act as a coordinated unit, increasing the chances of survival for everyone. Group living also introduced new types of fear. For an animal that depends on the group, being excluded or abandoned can be just as dangerous as facing a predator. Over time, the same systems that reacted to physical threats began to respond to social threats. The unease you might feel when being judged, criticized, or left out is part of this expanded role for fear. It's not that your body confuses the two types of threat. It's that the same survival machinery is used for both. As human societies developed, fear took on additional layers. The threats faced by early humans were still physical: predators, accidents, environmental hazards, but they were also increasingly shaped by human competition and conflict. The same alert systems that once scanned for the movement of large animals now scanned for signs of hostility in other humans. Reading facial expressions, interpreting tone of voice, and recognizing patterns of behavior became essential skills, and fear became more finely tuned to social signals. Even the structure of myths, stories, and cultural traditions reflects these ancient roots. Many traditional tales are essentially cautionary, stories that use fear to teach lessons about avoiding danger. Whether the danger is a predator in the forest, a treacherous path, or a mysterious figure, the underlying message is often the same: be alert, recognize threats early, and act to protect yourself and your group. These narratives preserve and reinforce the instincts that have served humans for so long. Some of the oldest fears are so deeply embedded that they persist even when they no longer match modern conditions. The startle you feel at a sudden rustle in the bushes is the same reaction that might have once saved a life on the savannah, even if today it's just the wind. The unease in a dark, unfamiliar place is a remnant of a time when nighttime travel carried serious risks. The dislike of certain animals, even when you know they're harmless, is a carryover from environments where such caution was wise. This persistence can sometimes be inconvenient, but it's also a testament to how effective these systems have been. Evolution tends to keep what works, even if it occasionally misfires in new environments. That's why the same alarm system that once reacted to the growl of a predator can now react to the buzz of a phone in the middle of the night. The system isn't picky about the source of the disturbance, only about the need to respond quickly. There's also a deeper reason why fear is so enduring. It's not just a personal tool, it's a species-level adaptation. Populations with a healthy distribution of cautious individuals are more likely to survive unpredictable threats. In this sense, fear is not just about you. It's about maintaining a balance that protects the group as a whole. Some individuals will be bolder, taking risks that might bring rewards, while others will be more cautious, guarding against danger. Both roles contribute to the success of the group over time. In humans, the ability to think about fear, to analyze it, discuss it, and even anticipate it, adds another layer. Unlike most animals, humans can imagine threats that are far in the future or entirely hypothetical. This capacity for foresight has obvious benefits for planning and preparation, but it also means the fear system can be activated by events that may never happen. The trade-off for advanced reasoning is a much larger space in which fear can operate. Over generations, the interaction between biology and culture has shaped fear into something both universal and deeply personal. The basic template is the same for everyone, an inherited system for detecting and responding to threats, but the specific triggers and responses are influenced by experience, learning, and the social environment. In this way, fear is both ancient and constantly adapting. Even the modern world hasn't erased the value of these ancient systems. Situations that require quick judgment and decisive action still benefit from the same rapid responses our ancestors relied on. The difference is that today many of the threats we face are more complex, less immediate, and less physical. This creates a mismatch, a system tuned for speed and clarity operating in a world where danger often unfolds slowly and ambiguously. Understanding fear as an ancient inheritance helps explain why. It sometimes feels out of proportion to the situation. The reaction isn't based only on the present moment. It's shaped by thousands of generations of moments where hesitation meant loss. The shadows that trigger it may have changed form, but the instinct to respond quickly remains the same. Fear doesn't travel alone, it has close relatives, emotions that share the same biological roots, but take different shapes depending on the circumstances. Sometimes these relatives overlap so much with fear that they're hard to separate. Other times, they feel entirely distinct, even though the same underlying systems are involved. Understanding these related states helps make sense of why fear can sometimes feel like something else entirely, and why emotions that seem unrelated can still set off the same physical changes in your body. One of the closest of these is anxiety. The distinction between fear and anxiety can be subtle. Fear is often tied to a specific, immediate threat, something you can identify and point to. Anxiety tends to be more diffuse, more about what might happen than what is happening right now. It's the tension before an exam, the unease before a difficult conversation, the worry that builds before a medical appointment. The body's reactions are similar: increased heart rate, muscle tension, changes in breathing, but the trigger is less concrete. From a biological standpoint, both fear and anxiety activate the amygdala and related circuits. The difference is in the source of the signal. Fear starts with sensory information about the present, a loud noise, a sudden movement, a threatening expression. Anxiety often starts with internal signals, thoughts, predictions, or memories that the brain treats as potential threats. Because the body doesn't always distinguish between actual and imagined dangers, anxiety can produce the same physical state as fear, sometimes for much longer periods. Another close relative is dread. While anxiety can be vague, dread is more focused. It's the heavy anticipation of something unpleasant that you believe is coming. This might be a meeting you expect to go badly, a performance you fear will falter, or an event you know will bring pain or loss. Dread combines the physical tension of fear with the mental focus of expectation. It keeps attention fixed on the coming event, often making it difficult to think about anything else. In this way, dread can draw heavily on the same attention-narrowing processes that make fear so effective in the moment. There's also the feeling of unease, a lighter, sometimes more ambiguous state that sits at the edge of awareness. Unease doesn't demand immediate action the way fear does, but it can be persistent. It might come from subtle signals in the environment, changes in someone's tone of voice, or patterns you notice without fully realizing it. The brain treats unease as a low-level alert, keeping systems ready without triggering the full alarm. This can be protective in situations where danger is possible but not certain, but it can also become tiring if it continues for long periods without resolution. Startle is another emotion closely related to fear, though it's more of a reflex than a sustained state. The startle response is a rapid, automatic reaction to sudden, unexpected stimuli. A loud sound, a sudden movement, a quick touch. It's a defensive reflex that can prepare you for action in an instant. Unlike broader fear responses, the startle reaction is short-lived. It can fade within seconds if no further threat is detected, but if the stimulus is followed by something genuinely dangerous, the startle can serve as the opening moment of a full fear response. There's also the experience of vigilance, a sustained state of alertness that shares much of the physiology of fear, but with a different mental focus. Vigilance is common in situations where danger is possible but not immediate, such as a guard watching over a perimeter, a driver in heavy traffic, or a parent keeping track of a child in a crowded place. The heightened attention and readiness for action are much like fear, but vigilance can be maintained for longer without the same emotional intensity. It draws on the same neural systems but is guided more by intention than by reflex. Suspicion overlaps with vigilance but adds a social dimension. When you're suspicious, you're on alert for deception, betrayal, or hidden motives. This state engages many of the same threat detection systems as fear, but focuses them on interpreting social cues, facial expressions, tone, body language, inconsistencies in behavior. The physiological readiness is still there, but the predator in this case may be someone's dishonesty rather than a physical danger. Another cousin of fear is apprehension. Like anxiety, it deals with the future, but it tends to be milder and more situational. You might feel apprehensive about meeting someone new, travelling to an unfamiliar place, or trying a skill you're not confident in. Apprehension can sometimes be motivating, prompting preparation and careful planning. In this way, it represents a softer edge of the fear spectrum, enough to focus attention and encourage caution, but not enough to overwhelm. Even emotions that don't seem related to fear can share its biological underpinnings. Anger, for example, can activate many of the same systems: increased heart rate, adrenaline release, narrowed attention. These happen whether you're preparing to defend yourself from a threat or confront someone in a disagreement. The difference lies in how the energy is directed. Fear often drives avoidance, while anger can drive approach. In some situations, the shift from fear to anger can happen in seconds, as the body's readiness for self-defense becomes readiness to take action. Curiosity might seem unrelated to fear, but it too involves scanning the environment, focusing attention, and preparing to respond to new information. In evolutionary terms, curiosity and fear are two sides of the same coin. One draws you toward the unknown, the other pushes you away from it. Both rely on detecting change and assessing potential outcomes. The balance between them can determine whether you explore a new path or avoid it. These emotional relatives of fear can overlap and combine in complex ways. A person might feel anxious and suspicious at the same time, or experience dread mixed with anger. The body's systems don't always isolate one emotion from another. Instead, they produce a blend of physical and mental states that reflect the demands of the moment. This blending is part of why it can be hard to label what you're feeling in the middle of an intense situation. From a survival perspective, the closeness of these emotions to fear makes sense. They're all variations on the theme of anticipating, detecting, and responding to potential threats. The differences lie in the source of the signal, the level of certainty, and the intended response. A system that could adapt to these variations would be more flexible and effective than one that only reacted to immediate obvious danger. These connections also explain why managing one of these emotions can influence the others. Reducing anxiety through relaxation techniques can make it easier to handle fear when it arises. Learning to manage anger can prevent it from escalating into fear-driven aggression. Training in situational awareness can help channel vigilance into constructive observation rather than constant tension. In daily life, the presence of these related emotions can shape how often and how strongly you experience fear. If you're prone to anxiety, the threshold for triggering fear might be lower. If you spend a lot of time in vigilance, you may be more sensitive to sudden changes. Understanding these patterns can make it easier to predict how you'll react in different situations and to adjust your strategies accordingly. Recognizing fear's relatives also highlights how much of emotional life is built on the same foundations. The same systems that keep you alive in the face of danger also shape your responses to uncertainty, change, and challenge. They influence how you interact with others, how you approach new experiences, and how you prepare for the future. It would be reasonable to assume that as human environments became safer, the system built to detect danger would grow quieter. But that isn't what's happened. For most people, daily life now carries far fewer immediate threats than it did for ancestors living in forests, savannas, or early settlements. Yet the same biological machinery that once helped avoid predators and hazards is still switched on, still sensitive, and in some cases more active than ever. This is the paradox of safety. Living in a world with fewer direct dangers but carrying an alarm system that hasn't slowed down to match. The first part of the explanation is that evolution works on a long time scale. The fear response is ancient and deeply embedded in human biology. It was refined over millions of years to work under conditions where the cost of a false alarm was small compared to the cost of missing a real threat. This means the system is built to err on the side of caution. Even if the actual number of threats drops, the threshold for activating the system doesn't automatically rise. Another reason is that safety in the modern sense doesn't mean the absence of uncertainty. While fewer people face predators or dangerous terrain, the world still contains countless situations that could bring harm, accidents, illness, conflict, and social loss among them. The human brain is skilled at imagining possibilities, and those possibilities can be enough to trigger the fear system. If the mind can create a vivid enough scenario, the body can respond as if it were real. In addition, modern life offers a constant flow of information about threats far outside of a person's immediate surroundings. News, social media, and other forms of communication can make dangers on the other side of the world feel close at hand. Seeing repeated images or hearing repeated reports of harm keeps the alarm system active, even when there's no direct risk. For the nervous system, the repeated signal that something is wrong somewhere can be enough to maintain a state of low-level alert. The structure of modern work and social life can also sustain this paradox. Many of today's challenges are ongoing rather than immediate. Deadlines, financial pressure, interpersonal conflict, and health concerns can stretch over weeks or months. The fear system evolved for short, intense bursts of activity, followed by recovery. When the demands are constant, the body can stay in a state of partial activation without a clear endpoint. This sustained activation can lead to chronic stress, which feels different from acute fear, but relies on much of the same biology. There's also the factor of control. In environments where people have less influence over their own safety, the fear system can become more sensitive. This can happen when jobs are unstable, communities are unsafe, or personal circumstances limit options for change. Even if physical harm is unlikely, the perception of vulnerability can keep the system primed. Lack of control is itself a kind of threat from the brain's perspective. It limits the ability to respond effectively, which is the very thing the alarm system exists to support. Interestingly, the same mechanisms that make fear protective can also make it self-sustaining. When the system activates, attention narrows to focus on the source of danger. This is useful when the danger is real and time-limited, but when the perceived threat is ongoing or unclear, the narrowed focus can keep feeding the sense that something is wrong. It becomes a loop. The alert state makes you search for threats, and searching for threats makes you more likely to find them, even if they're minor or uncertain. This is part of why safety doesn't automatically bring peace of mind. The absence of obvious danger doesn't necessarily deactivate the system. It might simply shift its attention to smaller or more distant concerns. In fact, in the absence of major threats, the system may become more reactive to small ones, much like a sensitive alarm that starts responding to harmless movements. This doesn't mean fear is malfunctioning. It means the system is calibrated to remain useful in an unpredictable world. There's another side to the paradox. Safety can sometimes increase sensitivity to fear. In environments where danger is rare, the experience of fear can feel more intense when it does happen. People who aren't used to dealing with sudden, high-pressure situations may find the physical sensations of fear more overwhelming, simply because they're less familiar. In contrast, those who encounter threats regularly may still feel fear, but they've learned to interpret and manage the sensations differently. The cultural context plays a role as well. Societies that place a high value on comfort and stability can create expectations that life should be largely free of discomfort or danger. When fear does arise, it can feel like a more significant disruption. The mismatch between expectation and reality can amplify the emotional impact, even if the actual risk is small. Technology and convenience have also changed the relationship between safety and fear. Many tasks that once involved real physical risk are now handled by machines or avoided altogether. While this reduces harm, it also reduces opportunities to experience controlled, manageable doses of fear, the kind that help the body and mind stay calibrated. Without these small exposures, the system may react more strongly when a threat does appear. Some researchers suggest that part of the modern anxiety problem is linked to this reduced exposure. Just as muscles weaken when they're not used, the ability to handle fear can diminish when it's not regularly engaged. Controlled experiences of fear, such as certain sports, challenges, or adventures, may act like training for the system, keeping it responsive but balanced. Without them, even minor triggers can feel outsized. This doesn't mean that fear in a safe environment is irrational. The system is designed to detect possibilities, not just certainties. Even in a world with fewer predators, the potential for harm still exists, and the brain's job is to prepare you for it. What makes the paradox complex is that preparation doesn't always match the actual level of risk. The system doesn't have a setting for modern life. It only has a setting for be ready. Understanding this can shift the way you interpret your own reactions. Feeling fear in a safe environment doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong with you. It means your system is doing exactly what it was built to do, just in a context it wasn't specifically designed for. The challenge is not to turn it off completely, but to manage it so it responds appropriately to the situations you actually face. The fear system may be ancient, but it's not fixed at birth. While certain responses are built in, the startle at a loud noise, the unease at sudden movement in the dark, the instinct to avoid heights. Much of what you fear is learned through experience. This flexibility is one of the system's most useful features. It allows you to adapt to the specific dangers of your environment, rather than relying only on a limited set of pre-programmed reactions. But it also means that fear can take root in ways that aren't always helpful, shaping your responses for years or even a lifetime. The process of learning fear often begins early. For a child, the world is full of unfamiliar sights, sounds, and sensations. Many of these are harmless, but some can bring real pain or discomfort. A child who touches a hot surface learns very quickly not to repeat the action. That lesson doesn't just come from the pain itself. It comes from the brain forming a strong association between the object and the unpleasant outcome. The amygdala plays a central role here, linking sensory information to the emotional weight of the experience. In classical conditioning, this link is formed when a neutral stimulus becomes paired with something aversive. One of the most well-known examples in psychology is a study where a loud noise was paired with the presence of a small animal. Over time, the subject began to react with fear to the animal itself, even without the noise. While the ethics of such studies are now viewed differently, the basic principle still applies in everyday life. An object, place, or sound can come to trigger fear if it has been paired with an unpleasant experience strongly enough. This kind of learning is not limited to direct experience. Humans are particularly good at learning fear through observation. Watching someone else react fearfully to a stimulus can be enough to create a similar response in you. This is one reason fears can spread so quickly through groups. One person's reaction can serve as a warning for others, whether or not they face the danger themselves. In families, children often pick up on the fears of their parents, sometimes without realizing it. A parent's anxious glance at a dog, a sharp intake of breath when crossing a high bridge, or a tense tone when discussing certain situations can all plant seeds of caution that grow into personal fears. Verbal instruction can also create fear. Being told repeatedly that a certain activity is dangerous can build an aversion, even if you've never experienced harm from it. This is part of how cultural fears develop. Groups pass down warnings about particular behaviours, places or situations, and those warnings become part of individual memory. These can be valuable when they reflect real risks, but they can also persist long after the original danger has faded. The strength of learned fear lies in its durability. Once the brain has formed a strong association between a stimulus and a negative outcome, that connection can be remarkably resistant to change. This is because the system is designed to avoid repeating mistakes. From an evolutionary perspective, the cost of overreacting is small compared to the cost of underreacting. If you've once been harmed by something, it's safer to assume it could happen again than to risk ignoring the danger. But this durability can also be a drawback. Fear learned from a single event can persist even when the context changes completely. A person who has been in a car accident may feel tense every time they drive, even if years have passed without incident. Someone who was bitten by a dog in childhood may still feel uneasy around dogs in adulthood, regardless of how gentle the animals they encounter are. The emotional memory overrides the logical assessment of current risk. Not all fear learning happens through direct pairing with harm. Sometimes the link is more subtle. You might feel uneasy in a location where nothing bad has ever happened to you personally, simply because it resembles a place where you once felt afraid. The brain's pattern-matching abilities are powerful but not always precise. If enough elements are similar, the system may treat the new situation as if it were the old one, activating the same responses. Context plays a significant role in how fear is learned and recalled. If a frightening event happens in a particular environment, the cues from that environment, sights, sounds, smells, can become part of the memory. Later, encountering those cues again can trigger the emotional response even without the original threat. This is one reason certain smells or sounds can bring back vivid feelings from past events with surprising strength. While fear learning is often adaptive, it can also create problems when it becomes too broad. If the system generalizes too much from a single event, you may find yourself avoiding not just the original trigger, but anything that resembles it. This can limit your activities and experiences unnecessarily. In extreme cases, such overgeneralization can contribute to phobias, where the fear response is triggered by stimuli that pose little or no real danger. Fortunately, learned fear is not unchangeable. The brain is capable of modifying or weakening fear associations through a process called extinction. This occurs when the feared stimulus is encountered repeatedly without the negative outcome. Over time, the brain updates its prediction, reducing the intensity of the response. However, extinction is not the same as erasing the original memory. The old association can return under stress, a phenomenon known as spontaneous recovery. This is why fears that seem to fade can sometimes reappear unexpectedly. Another way fear learning can be altered is through counterconditioning, where the feared stimulus is paired with something positive. For example, a person afraid of dogs might gradually interact with calm, friendly dogs while engaging in enjoyable activities. Over time, the positive associations can compete with and weaken the original fear memory. This approach is often used in therapeutic settings to help people manage specific fears and phobias. The brain's ability to learn fear so readily is part of what makes it such an effective survival tool. It allows you to adapt to new dangers quickly, sometimes after only one encounter, but it also means that fear can be learned in situations where it's not truly necessary, and once learned, it can shape behavior long after the original cause is gone. In the broader sense, fear learning is not just about avoiding harm, it's about preparing for it. By storing detailed records of past threats and their contexts, the brain creates a personalized map of danger. This map isn't fixed. It changes as new experiences add information or as old ones are reinterpreted. And sometimes, that map contains routes that were drawn before you were even born, paths shaped by the fears of those who came before you. The fear you feel in your own life is shaped by your experiences, but not only by them. In subtle ways, it can also be influenced by events you've never lived through, moments faced by those who came before you, whose bodies and minds adapted to dangers you never saw. This isn't about inherited memories in the literal sense, like stories stored in your mind from the day you were born. It's about how certain responses can be prepared in advance by biology, ready to activate under the right conditions because they were useful for survival in previous generations. Some of these inherited responses are part of the universal human template. The quick reaction to a sudden loud sound, the wariness around potentially venomous animals, the caution at the edge of a high place. These are examples of instincts that likely became hardwired over many thousands of generations. They don't require learning in the traditional sense. A newborn doesn't need to fall from a height to feel the urge to hold tight. These are reflexes tuned by the survival needs of the species as a whole. But there is another layer to inheritance, one that's more personal and less fixed. Research in the field of epigenetics has shown that life experiences can sometimes leave marks on the way genes are expressed. This doesn't change the genes themselves, but it can influence how active they are, which proteins they produce, and how those proteins affect the body's systems. In the context of fear, this means that prolonged exposure to stress or trauma in one generation could make the fear system in the next generation more sensitive, even without direct exposure to the same events. In studies with animals, for example, researchers have found that when a parent is exposed to a particular fear conditioning, such as associating a specific smell with an unpleasant stimulus, their offspring can show heightened sensitivity to that smell, despite never having experienced the pairing themselves. This suggests that the parent's experience left a biological imprint that influenced the offspring's sensory and emotional responses. While the exact mechanisms in humans are still being studied, evidence from families affected by war, famine, and other large-scale traumas suggests that similar processes might occur. Children and grandchildren of those who lived through extreme hardship sometimes show differences in stress hormone regulation, anxiety levels, or threat sensitivity compared to those without that family history. These differences don't mean the descendants are doomed to carry the same fears, but they might start life with a system that reacts more quickly or more strongly to certain triggers. Beyond biology, there's the inheritance that comes through behavior and environment. Families pass down patterns of responding to danger through the way they talk, the things they avoid, and the emotional signals they send. A child who grows up watching adults treat certain situations with caution or alarm will often absorb those reactions as part of their own toolkit. This can happen without direct instruction. The tone of voice, the quickened movements, or the decision to leave a place can all communicate that something is worth fearing. In this way, fear can move through generations like a story told without words. A person might avoid certain activities without being entirely sure why, only that it's not safe, or we don't do that. Sometimes the reason is rooted in a specific event from decades earlier. A storm that damaged a home, an accident that happened on a certain road, an illness that followed a particular food. The details may fade, but the behavior remains. Cultural inheritance works in much the same way, but on a larger scale. Groups pass down collective fears shaped by shared history. A community that endured repeated floods might place a special emphasis on avoiding low-lying areas, even after engineering changes have reduced the risk. A population that faced conflict with a neighbouring group might maintain a deep mistrust long after open hostilities have ended. These collective fears can influence behaviour, policy, and identity for generations, blending into the background of daily life. The difficulty with inherited fear is that it can be both protective and limiting. In some cases, the caution it creates remains useful. If a particular danger still exists, carrying that sensitivity forward is an advantage. But when the original threat is gone, the inherited response can feel out of place. The body still reacts, even if the mind knows there's no reason to. This can create a sense of confusion or frustration, as if the fear comes from nowhere. Recognizing that some fears may have roots beyond your own lifetime can change the way you approach them. Instead of treating them solely as personal flaws or overreactions, you can see them as part of a much longer story, one that includes survival, adaptation, and the handing down of tools that once kept people safe. That perspective doesn't erase the difficulty of living with unnecessary fear, but it can remove some of the judgment and open the door to different ways of addressing it. There is also an interesting connection between inherited fear and resilience. Just as sensitivity can be passed down, so can coping strategies. Families and cultures don't only transmit what to avoid, they also pass along ways of handling danger when it can't be avoided. Stories of endurance, examples of problem solving, and rituals for regaining a sense of control are all part of the same inheritance. This means that even when fear is heightened by history, so too might be the capacity to meet it. Some inherited fears are so subtle that they only reveal themselves in particular contexts. A person might live comfortably for years without noticing a sensitivity, until a specific combination of sights, sounds, or circumstances brings it to the surface. Others are more constant, shaping decisions in small ways every day. Both kinds can influence the course of a life without ever being named directly. It's also possible for inherited fears to fade over time. As generations pass without encountering the original danger, the responses can become weaker. This is one way culture and environment can retune the system, slowly aligning it more closely with current conditions. The change is gradual, and in some cases the fear may never fully disappear, but it can lose its hold on daily behaviour. Understanding that fear can be both learned and inherited raises another question. How does the system know when to stop? If fear can be passed forward so effectively, what prevents it from building endlessly, layering generation on generation until the system is overwhelmed? Not all fears are tied to physical dangers. Some are rooted in the way we relate to other people, in the signals we send and receive, in the constant and subtle negotiation of acceptance, trust, and belonging. These are social fears, and they occupy a unique place in human life because they draw on the same ancient alarm systems that protect the body from harm, yet they respond to a different kind of threat, one that can't be fought off with muscle or escaped by running. For humans, belonging to a group has always been a matter of survival. In the environments where the fear system was shaped, isolation could mean reduced access to resources, less protection from predators, and fewer chances to pass on one's genes. As a result, the brain treats social rejection or exclusion as more than just an inconvenience. It registers them as genuine threats, activating many of the same pathways involved in physical danger. You can see this connection in the way the body reacts to social stress. Being criticized in front of others, feeling unwelcome in a group, or sensing that someone is losing trust in you can trigger an increase in heart rate, a shift in breathing, and the release of stress hormones. These changes are almost identical to the ones that happen in physical fear. The difference is in the source of the signal. Instead of a predator or a sudden noise, it's the perception that your standing with other people is at risk. The part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex is especially active in these moments. It's involved in processing both physical pain and social pain, which might explain why rejection or humiliation can feel physically unpleasant. That overlap is more than metaphorical. The nervous system treats the emotional wound as something that requires attention, because for much of human history, losing social bonds was a real danger to survival. Humans are exceptionally sensitive to social cues, and this sensitivity is one of the main channels through which social fears operate. A glance, a tone of voice, a shift in posture. These can all carry signals about acceptance or disapproval. The amygdala, already central in detecting threats, plays a role in interpreting these cues, especially those related to emotion. If someone's facial expression shifts from friendly to tense, your attention can be pulled toward it immediately, sometimes before you've consciously noticed the change. This rapid processing is useful, but it can also make you vulnerable to misinterpretation. The brain's tendency to err on the side of caution means it might detect rejection or hostility where none exists, leading to unnecessary tension. Over time, repeated false alarms in social contexts can contribute to a heightened baseline of anxiety around other people. This is especially true for those who have experienced real social rejection or bullying. The system becomes tuned to detect those signals more readily, even in neutral situations. Fear in social contexts can take many forms. There's the fear of embarrassment, which centers on being seen as inadequate or foolish. There's the fear of judgment, which focuses on how others evaluate your actions, appearance, or abilities. There's the fear of exclusion, which is about being left out of activities, groups, or important decisions. And there's the fear of confrontation, which involves anticipating conflict or disagreement. Each of these draws on the same physiological resources as fear of physical danger, but the strategies for dealing with them are different. One of the striking things about social fear is how it can be triggered even in imagined situations. Thinking about a future meeting, presentation, or conversation can be enough to activate the system. This is partly because the brain rehearses these events as if they were real, running through possible outcomes and preparing for each. In some cases, this preparation is helpful, practicing responses, considering different perspectives, and planning actions. In others, it simply prolongs the stress, keeping the alarm system active long before anything has actually happened. The role of memory in social fear is also strong. Past experiences of embarrassment or rejection can remain vivid for years, ready to influence how you approach similar situations in the future. The more intense the emotional impact of the event, the more likely it is to be stored in a way that makes it easily retrievable. This means a single moment, a failed speech, a public mistake, a hurtful comment can shape behavior long after the original audience has forgotten it. Social fears are not purely individual. Groups themselves can develop collective anxieties about interactions with other groups, often rooted in history, competition, or perceived differences. These collective social fears can influence how members of the group behave, the alliances they form, and the conflicts they enter. In this way, the same mechanisms that manage individual relationships can scale up to influence entire societies. It's worth noting that social fear isn't purely harmful. Just as physical fear can prevent injury, social fear can prevent harm to relationships and reputations. It encourages behaviours that maintain trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. The challenge comes when the fear is stronger than necessary for the situation, leading to avoidance, withdrawal, or excessive self-monitoring that interferes with genuine connection. For some, social fear can become a central feature of life. Social anxiety disorder, for example, involves persistent and intense fear of social situations where judgment is possible. People with this condition may avoid these situations entirely or endure them with significant distress. The symptoms, sweating, trembling, racing heart, difficulty speaking, are the same as in other forms of fear, but they're tied to interactions rather than physical threats. In less extreme cases, social fear may appear only in certain contexts, speaking to authority figures, meeting new people, or participating in group activities. Even when mild, these fears can influence choices about education, work, and relationships, gradually shaping the structure of a person's life. The avoidance that grows out of these fears can limit opportunities, reduce social support, and reinforce the original anxiety by reducing positive social experiences. The universality of social fear points to its deep evolutionary roots. In small groups, maintaining good relationships was as important to survival as finding food or avoiding predators. The same systems that once helped early humans detect danger in the environment now help detect shifts in social dynamics. In both cases, the goal is the same: to respond quickly to potential threats and protect resources, whether those resources are physical or social. But while the system is well tuned for the small, close-knit groups of early human life, the modern social environment is much larger and more complex. Today, many interactions happen with strangers, through written messages, or in public settings where dozens or hundreds of people can observe at once. The brain's alarm system responds to these situations much as it would to a change in tone from a close companion. Only now, the stakes may feel higher because of the scale and visibility. Technology has intensified this effect by creating social contexts where feedback is rapid, constant, and often public. A comment online, a post on social media, a photograph shared widely, all of these can trigger the same mechanisms that once dealt with much smaller audiences. For some, this can amplify social fear, making interactions feel riskier even when they carry no real danger. Understanding social fear as part of the broader fear system makes it easier to see why it feels so strong and why it can shape so many aspects of life. It's not a flaw or a weakness. It's a feature of a system designed to protect something essential: the bonds between people. Like physical fear, it's meant to keep you safe, but it can also limit you if it becomes too active. And just as with physical fear, there are moments when social fear doesn't lead to movement or escape, but to stillness. In these moments, the system chooses not to act immediately, holding back in the hope that the situation will change or that the threat will pass unnoticed. This stillness is not weakness. It's another ancient strategy, one that's been used in countless contexts to avoid harm. When most people think of fear, they picture movement, running away, fighting back, taking immediate action. But fear has another response that's just as old, just as deeply rooted in biology, and sometimes even more effective. It's the freeze. Instead of pushing you to act, it holds you in place, muscles tense, senses sharpened, as if the world has narrowed to a single moment. It's a pause that can last seconds, minutes, or longer, depending on the situation, and it's one of the most misunderstood parts of the fear system. The freeze response is part of a continuum that also includes fight and flight. In many animals, freeze is the first reaction to certain threats, especially those where movement might attract attention. Staying still can make a predator lose interest or fail to notice you in the first place. In humans, the same principle applies, even though the threats we face are often different. In a tense conversation, during a sudden loud noise, or in the moment before giving a speech, the body can slip into stillness, holding energy in reserve while deciding what to do next. Biologically, freezing is not the absence of action, it's a highly active state. Heart rate can drop suddenly, a phenomenon called bradycardia, which helps conserve energy and may improve the ability to hear subtle sounds. Muscles are primed for movement, ready to shift into running or defending if needed. The brain is on high alert, scanning for details that might determine the next step. This is a strategic pause, not collapse. The choice between freeze, fight, or flight is influenced by many factors: the distance of the threat, the availability of escape routes, the likelihood of successful defense, and past experiences in similar situations. If the system calculates that running or fighting would be too risky, freezing becomes the safer option. This isn't always a conscious decision. In fact, it often happens before conscious thought catches up. In some situations, freeze is a prelude to other actions. A deer might freeze at the sound of a snapping twig, then bolt when the predator steps into view. A person might freeze when an unexpected question is asked, then answer once they've had a fraction of a second to process it. The freeze buys time for assessment, allowing the brain to gather more information before committing to a course of action. In other situations, freeze is the entire response. Some predators are triggered by movement, so remaining still can reduce the chance of attack. In human contexts, freeze might prevent escalation, not speaking when provoked, not reacting immediately to an insult, not moving when startled in a dangerous environment. While this can sometimes be misinterpreted as fear taking control, it's better understood as fear using a specific tactic. The experience of freezing can vary widely. Some people describe it as feeling rooted in place, unable to move even when they want to. Others experience it as a narrowing of attention, where everything else fades except for the threat. Time may seem to slow, not because the clock changes, but because the brain is processing so much information in such a short span. This intense focus is one of the advantages of freeze. It maximizes the chances of spotting an opening for escape or an opportunity to act effectively. However, freeze can become problematic when it occurs in situations where movement would be more helpful. In some traumatic experiences, freeze is the dominant response, and afterward, the person may feel frustration or guilt for not having acted differently. This is often based on the mistaken belief that freeze was a choice rather than an automatic survival mechanism. The truth is that freeze is as instinctive and uncontrollable in the moment as pulling your hand away from something hot. In psychological terms, freeze is sometimes linked with dissociation, a sense of detachment from the immediate situation. This can help reduce the emotional impact of overwhelming events, but it can also interfere with later memory of what happened. In extreme cases, dissociation during freeze can make it difficult to recall details, leading to confusion about the sequence of events. This too is part of the survival strategy. By dampening certain aspects of awareness, the brain reduces the potential for harm from stress. The persistence of freeze in humans reflects its success as a strategy over millions of years. In the wild, an animal that freezes at the right moment can avoid detection entirely. In human history, staying still in dangerous situations, whether during conflict, while hunting, or when hiding, could mean the difference between life and death. The fact that it sometimes appears in less dangerous contexts today is not a flaw in the system. It's the system applying an ancient rule to a modern environment. There's also an interaction between freeze and the other responses to fear. Sometimes freeze transitions into fight or flight once conditions change. Other times, fight or flight collapse back into freeze when an escape attempt fails or resistance proves impossible. This flexibility allows the system to adapt in real time, switching strategies based on new information. In everyday life, freeze can show up in ways that aren't immediately recognized as fear. Pausing before answering a difficult question, going blank during a presentation, feeling stuck in a decision. These can all be variations of freeze. They may not involve physical danger, but they still trigger the same core mechanisms: a rapid halt to movement, intense focus, and a readiness to act if necessary. In therapy and research, understanding freeze has become important for working with trauma. People who experience guilt or shame about freezing in a crisis often find relief in learning that it was an automatic, protective reaction. Recognizing freeze as a survival strategy, rather than a failure, can be an important step in recovery. It reframes the event, showing that the body and brain were doing their best under the circumstances. Even in the modern world, freeze still has value. Intense negotiations, during delicate tasks, or when navigating unfamiliar environments, taking a moment to pause and observe can prevent costly mistakes. The key difference between adaptive and maladaptive freeze is whether the pause serves a purpose in the situation at hand. When it does, it's a tool. When it doesn't, it can become an obstacle. The responses we think of as human, the pounding heart, the sudden stillness, the quick calculation between running and standing ground, are not ours alone. They are shared with countless other species, many of whom have been practicing these strategies for far longer than humans have existed. In the wild, fear is not an abstract concept or a subject for reflection. It is a constant shaping every decision and every movement in ways that are often invisible to an outside observer. For animals living without the protections of human society, the margin for error is slim. Every day brings the possibility of becoming prey, losing resources, or failing to reproduce. In this environment, fear is as much a part of life as eating or sleeping. It guides the timing of foraging, the choice of shelter, the routes taken through familiar territory. Even the most confident predators are not free from it. A lion still watches for rivals, a hawk keeps an eye out for threats from above, a shark avoids larger, faster hunters. The way fear is expressed in the wild depends heavily on the species, the environment, and the nature of the threat. Prey animals often rely on a combination of vigilance and rapid escape. Many herbivores have eyes positioned on the sides of their heads to increase their field of vision, making it harder for predators to approach undetected. The cost of this design is reduced depth perception, but the trade-off is worth it when the main priority is spotting danger early. Some animals take advantage of camouflage, blending into their surroundings to avoid detection. For them, fear often triggers freezing rather than running. A hare crouching in the grass, a gecko pressed flat against a tree trunk, a cuttlefish changing its skin pattern to match the ocean floor. These are freeze responses refined into an art form. The decision to remain still instead of fleeing depends on the distance to safety, the likelihood of being seen, and the type of predator nearby. Social animals often use group strategies to manage fear. Flocks of birds, herds of antelope, and schools of fish rely on the many eyes and ears of their members to detect threats quickly. When one member spots danger and reacts, the movement or call can set off a chain reaction, prompting the whole group to flee in seconds. This rapid communication is essential because in the wild, hesitation can be fatal. Predators too experience fear, though their threats are often different. A predator can become prey to a larger species, to a rival of the same kind, or to disease and injury. A hunting animal might abandon a kill if a stronger competitor arrives. A territorial male might withdraw from a confrontation if the opponent's display signals a high chance of serious injury. In these cases, fear serves the same function as it does for prey, to avoid situations where survival is at risk. Many species have developed specific alarm signals to communicate danger. Meerkats post sentries that call out when a predator is spotted, sending the rest of the group underground. Vervet monkeys use different calls for aerial predators like eagles and ground predators like leopards, allowing others to take the most effective action. In the ocean, dolphins produce rapid whistle patterns when threatened, coordinating group movements to protect vulnerable members. These alarm systems work because fear is not only an individual experience, but also a shared one that can synchronize the actions of an entire group. The timing and intensity of fear responses in animals are tuned by experience. A young gazelle may learn from its mother's behavior when to flee and when to stay still. A wolf pup may learn from its pack how close to approach prey before backing off. This learning is often a mix of observation and personal encounters, and just like in humans, it can be shaped by a single powerful event. An animal that survives a close call will often adjust its behavior afterward, becoming more cautious in similar situations. Fear in the wild can also shape entire ecosystems. When predators are present, prey animals may change their feeding patterns, avoiding certain areas even if food is abundant there. This landscape of fear influences where plants grow, how other species distribute themselves, and how energy flows through the system. For example, when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, elk began avoiding certain valleys where they were more vulnerable. This change allowed vegetation in those areas to recover, which in turn affected the entire food web. Not all fear responses are about avoidance. Some animals use aggressive displays to deter threats before a fight becomes necessary. A cobra spreads its hood, a cat arches its back and hisses, a gorilla beats its chest. These displays are designed to make the animal look larger and more dangerous, convincing the potential attacker that the cost of a fight is too high. Such strategies reduce the need for physical confrontation while still protecting the animal. In some cases, animals will even approach a threat to assess it. This predator inspection behavior has been observed in fish, birds, and mammals. By moving closer to the potential danger, often in pairs or small groups, the animals gather information that helps them decide whether to flee or stay. It's a calculated risk, balancing the need for safety with the need for accurate information. Fear in the wild is not constant. It rises and falls with the rhythms of daily life. Many animals are more active during times of day when their predators are less active, using light levels, temperature, and environmental cover to reduce risk. Seasonal changes also affect fear levels. During breeding season, some animals take greater risks, prioritizing reproduction over safety. During migration, others cross dangerous areas because the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term risks. There's a precision to how fear works in the wild that can be easy to overlook. The system is not designed to be active all the time. Constant high alert would waste energy and reduce time available for feeding, resting, and reproduction. Instead, fear is deployed strategically, switching on when the risk is significant and switching off when the threat has passed. In this sense, the wild offers an example of balance. Fear is essential, but only in the right amounts at the right times. When humans observe these behaviors in other animals, it can create a sense of familiarity. The freeze of a rabbit in the grass, the scanning eyes of a flock of geese, the cautious retreat of a fox from an unfamiliar sound, all of these mirror the responses we know in ourselves. They are reminders that fear is not a uniquely human burden, but a shared inheritance, refined by the same forces over millions of years. This shared heritage also explains why certain triggers affect humans so strongly. Sudden movements, looming shapes, and certain animal calls tap into ancient pathways that were once vital for survival. Even in modern settings, these signals can bypass conscious thought, producing a jolt of alertness before the mind has time to reason through the situation. From the savannah to the forest floor to the open ocean, fear shapes behavior in ways that make survival more likely. It is not just a reaction, it is a guide, a constant undercurrent in the decisions animals make. And while humans have changed their environment drastically, the same system still operates, tuned by a past where every sound and shadow carried meaning. Understanding fear in the wild makes it easier to see why it remains so persistent in us. The system has always been about readiness, about noticing the moment when things shift from safe to dangerous. Even in a world without lurking predators or nighttime hunts, certain things can still trigger an immediate involuntary surge of fear. A slamming door, a sudden shout, a shadow moving unexpectedly across the wall. In modern life, one of the most concentrated forms of this effect is found in entertainment, particularly in horror films, games, and haunted attractions, the jump scare. It's a manufactured moment designed to provoke the same rapid-fire reaction that once protected our ancestors from genuine threats. A jump scare works by exploiting the brain's sensitivity to sudden, unexpected changes in the environment. The fear system evolved to respond instantly to these changes because they could signal danger. The snap of a twig in the dark might mean a predator is nearby. A shift in wind direction could mean a storm is coming. A sudden silence in the forest might mean something is about to happen. This is why, even in the absence of actual threat, the body reacts as if it's in danger. The key to a successful jump scare is timing. In films, for example, this often involves a period of calm or tension building before the sudden event. The quiet scene, the slow pan of the camera, the steady breathing of the character, all of these elements lower the viewer's immediate alertness while still maintaining a sense of unease. The brain is balancing between relaxation and vigilance, and when the sudden sound or visual arrives, the system tips sharply into full activation. This abrupt shift is important because it engages the startle reflex. The startle reflex is an automatic reaction that involves a quick contraction of facial and body muscles, an increase in heart rate, and a rapid intake of breath. It's a reflex so deeply ingrained that it's present in infants and shared with many other mammals. Its purpose is to prepare the body for rapid action in the face of sudden change. In a real threat situation, this might mean dodging an attack or preparing to flee. In a jump scare, it means the body responds before the mind can remind it that there's no danger. Sound plays a major role in jump scares because the auditory system is particularly good at detecting sudden changes. A loud, sharp noise can bypass much of the brain's processing and go straight to the pathways that control reflexive movement. This is why even people who aren't watching the screen closely can still be startled by an unexpected sound. Filmmakers often use sound spikes, abrupt, high-volume noises, to create the physical jolt that defines a jump scare. Visual elements also contribute. Sudden movement in the periphery of vision can be enough to trigger a startle, even if the movement is small. In dark environments, the effect is amplified because the visual system has less information to work with, making it more sensitive to any change. This is part of why so many jump scares in films happen in dimly lit settings. It's not just for atmosphere, but because the human eye and brain are more reactive there. Another component is misdirection. The audience is led to expect something in one part of the scene, only for the scare to come from somewhere else. This plays on the brain's limited attention. When focused in one direction, it's more vulnerable to being surprised from another. The fear system treats this as a sign that it missed something important, amplifying the startle response. In haunted attractions, designers use a combination of these techniques, often with an added element, proximity. Having something appear suddenly within arm's reach can make the scare feel more intense, because it engages personal space boundaries. The brain interprets intrusions into this space as potentially dangerous, increasing the sense of urgency in the response. What makes jump scares interesting from a psychological perspective is that they're a safe way to experience a primal reaction. The body responds as if in danger, but the conscious mind quickly catches up and realizes there's no real threat. This can create a kind of pleasurable after effect, the release of tension, the nervous laughter, the quick exchange of glances with others who were startled too. It's the same system that would help you survive a predator encounter, but here it's activated in a controlled, temporary way. The appeal of jump scares varies from person to person. Some enjoy the adrenaline rush and the sense of mastery that comes from facing a scare and recovering quickly. Others dislike the loss of control or the uncomfortable physical sensations that come with the sudden activation of the fear system. In both cases, the mechanism at work is the same. It's the interpretation of that mechanism that changes the experience. Repeated exposure to jump scares can alter the way the fear system responds. In some cases, it reduces sensitivity. People become accustomed to the patterns and can anticipate the moment of surprise. In others, it can make the system more reactive, especially if the scares are frequent and unpredictable. This mirrors how fear learning works in other contexts. The system adjusts its sensitivity based on patterns of exposure. There's also an interesting balance in how jump scares are used in storytelling. Too many in a row can reduce their effectiveness, leading to diminishing returns as the audience learns to expect them. Too few, and the sense of tension may fade. The most effective use often comes when the audience has been lulled into thinking they're safe, only to be reminded suddenly that they're not. This plays directly into the evolutionary design of the fear system. It's meant to be most effective when danger is unexpected. Outside of entertainment, similar principles apply in real life. A sudden honk of a car horn, a phone ringing in the middle of the night, a shout from another room. All of these can provoke a reaction akin to a jump scare. In each case, the body responds before the conscious mind has processed the situation, because the potential cost of waiting is too high. The system errs on the side of action. The ability to trigger this response so easily is part of what makes fear such a reliable survival tool. Even in the absence of real danger, the pathways are ready, the reflexes intact. In a world where threats are less immediate but still possible, this readiness ensures that we remain alert to sudden changes. Whether in a darkened cinema, a quiet hallway, or a busy street, the system stands by, waiting for the moment when stillness breaks. Why people sometimes go looking for fear? If the system is designed to protect, why would anyone seek out experiences that make it activate? For something designed to keep us safe, fear has an odd quality. In the right setting, some people go looking for it. They pay to sit in dark theatres where monsters leap from the shadows. They line up for roller coasters that send them hurtling through the air. They walk willingly into haunted houses where strangers in costumes reach for them from hidden corners. Even in everyday life, people tell scary stories, watch unsettling documentaries, or explore abandoned places that feel just a little too quiet. If fear is meant to be avoided, why does it have this appeal? Part of the answer lies in control. In the wild, fear arrives without warning, and you have little choice but to react. But in a safe, staged environment, you choose when and how to engage with it. You buy the ticket, step into the queue, or press play on the movie. You know that when it's over, you can step back into normal life. The fear is real in the moment. Your heart races, your muscles tense, your breathing changes. But beneath it is the steady knowledge that no lasting harm will come from it. That difference changes the way the experience feels. In this controlled setting, fear becomes a kind of thrill. The body's reaction to perceived danger, the release of adrenaline, the increased alertness, the surge of energy, is the same whether the threat is real or staged. But when the mind recognizes that there is no genuine danger, it can reinterpret those physical changes as excitement rather than distress. The rush of chemicals becomes something to enjoy, not escape. This relabeling of the experience is part of what psychologists call arousal transfer. The heightened state created by fear can intensify other emotions that follow it. If you're with friends in a haunted house and you make it through a frightening section, the relief and laughter afterward can feel amplified because of the physical state you were in moments before. In this way, fear can serve as a kind of emotional amplifier, making positive feelings stronger once the threat has passed. There's also a social aspect to seeking fear. Shared fear can strengthen bonds between people. When you and someone else experience a frightening moment together, whether in real life or in a safe setting, you're likely to feel more connected afterward. The synchronized reactions, the jump, the gasp, the quick glance to check each other's expressions, create a sense of unity. This effect may be rooted in the way groups have historically survived danger by coordinating their responses. For some, deliberately facing fear is a way to test limits. Choosing to engage with something that makes you uneasy can be a form of self-assessment, a way to see how you react under pressure. If you discover that you can handle it, that you can stay on the roller coaster until it stops, that you can walk through the haunted house without leaving early, that you can finish the scary story even when your pulse is high, it can boost confidence in your ability to manage fear in other situations. On a deeper level, controlled fear can also serve as practice. The systems involved in responding to a jump scare or a suspenseful film are the same ones that respond to real-life threats. By activating them in a safe context, you may be reinforcing the coordination between body and mind that's needed in more serious situations. This doesn't mean watching horror movies will make you better at handling emergencies, but it may help you become more familiar with the sensations of fear and less likely to be overwhelmed by them. There's an element of curiosity as well. Fear is a powerful signal that something important is happening, and humans are naturally drawn to things that feel important. Even when the fear is unpleasant, it can hold attention in a way that few other emotions can. This is why suspense works so well in storytelling. The question of what will happen next keeps the mind engaged, even when part of it wants to look away. In some cases, seeking fear can be a way of exploring the boundaries of mortality in a safe space. Stories about danger, death, and the unknown allow people to think about these topics without being directly confronted by them. This can make the reality of such topics less intimidating over time, as the mind becomes more accustomed to their presence in thought. Not everyone enjoys fear in entertainment, and that's natural. Individual differences in sensitivity to fear, past experiences and tolerance for uncertainty all play a role in whether someone finds it thrilling or unpleasant. For those who dislike it, the physical sensations may be too intense, the loss of control too uncomfortable, or the after effects too lingering to make it enjoyable. For those who do enjoy it, part of the appeal is in the cycle itself. The build-up, the moment of peak fear, and the release that follows. This rhythm mirrors other rewarding cycles in life, like the satisfaction after physical exertion, or the calm after solving a difficult problem. The difference is that here, the tension is emotional and physiological rather than purely mental or physical. It's worth noting that the appetite for fear can vary over time. Someone who enjoys horror films as a teenager might find them less appealing later in life, or vice versa. Stress levels, personal circumstances, and changes in perspective can all influence how the fear system interacts with staged danger. What once felt exciting might later feel overwhelming, or what once felt too intense might become manageable with experience. Cultural background also shapes how people approach fear. In some cultures, ghost stories and tales of danger are common parts of childhood, told in ways that balance fear with humour or moral lessons. In others, such stories might be less common, making the experience of fear in entertainment more novel when it appears. These differences can influence how readily someone seeks out fear later on. When fear is sought deliberately, it becomes a tool rather than just a reaction. It can provide excitement, connection, self-knowledge, and even a form of resilience training. The key is that the danger is controlled and temporary, allowing the fear system to operate at full capacity without the lasting consequences it was designed to avoid. When fear becomes a constant presence, it stops feeling like a sharp jolt and starts feeling like a weight. Instead of flaring up and fading away, it hums in the background, always active, always pulling energy from somewhere. The body systems were built for short bursts of fear, the kind that arrive suddenly and resolve quickly. When the system stays on for too long, the same processes that once kept you alive can begin to wear you down. At the heart of this toll is the stress response. When fear triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol, it prepares the body for action, increasing heart rate, sharpening focus, mobilizing energy stores. These changes are adaptive in the short term, but they aren't meant to last. If cortisol levels remain elevated for days, weeks, or months, they can interfere with almost every major system in the body. One of the most immediate effects is on the cardiovascular system. Prolonged activation can raise blood pressure, strain the heart, and contribute to the development of conditions like hypertension. Over time, the arteries themselves can become less flexible, increasing the risk of heart disease. What was once a helpful burst of readiness becomes a slow, steady pressure that the body can't easily turn off. The immune system is also affected. In the short term, stress hormones can enhance certain immune responses, helping the body prepare for possible injury. But with chronic fear, this effect reverses. The immune system can become suppressed, making it harder to fight off infections and heal from injuries. People living with ongoing anxiety or high stress often find themselves catching colds more easily or taking longer to recover from illness. Digestion is another area where fear takes a toll. When the body prepares for danger, it shifts resources away from long-term processes like breaking down food. If this redirection happens repeatedly or continuously, it can lead to problems like stomach discomfort, irritable bowel symptoms, or changes in appetite. The gut and the brain are closely connected through the vagus nerve, so ongoing fear can create a feedback loop where digestive distress increases anxiety, which in turn worsens digestive issues. Sleep can be one of the first things to suffer when fear lingers. The alertness that helps you notice danger in the moment can make it difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep through the night. Even when sleep comes, it may be lighter and less restorative, leaving you more vulnerable to stress the next day. Over time, this lack of deep rest can amplify the physical and mental effects of fear, creating a cycle that's hard to break. In the brain, prolonged exposure to fear-related stress can affect the balance between different regions. The amygdala, which detects threats, can become more reactive, while the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate and contextualize fear, can become less active. This shift makes it harder to tell the difference between genuine threats and false alarms, leading to an overall increase in anxiety. The hippocampus, important for memory, can also be affected, making it harder to store new memories or recall details accurately. These brain changes help explain why chronic fear can feel self-sustaining. The system is tuned to detect danger, so it keeps finding it, even in safe environments. Each new signal reinforces the idea that vigilance is necessary, keeping the stress response active. This can happen in situations like long-term job insecurity, ongoing conflict, or recovery from a traumatic event. Even when the original cause fades, the body may continue acting as if it's still present. The emotional toll of chronic fear is just as significant. Living in a constant state of alertness can lead to irritability, difficulty concentrating, and a reduced ability to enjoy activities that once felt rewarding. The focus on potential danger leaves less mental space for creativity, problem-solving, and relaxation. Over time, this can erode relationships, work performance, and overall quality of life. In some cases, the toll becomes visible in behavior. People may start avoiding situations that trigger fear, even if those situations are important for their goals or well-being. This avoidance can shrink a person's world, reducing opportunities for connection, growth, and pleasure. While avoidance can provide short-term relief, it often strengthens the fear in the long term, because the system never has a chance to learn that the situation can be handled safely. The body keeps score of this toll in ways that may not be obvious day to day. Over months and years, the strain of constant activation can contribute to chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain autoimmune disorders. While these illnesses have many causes, long-term stress and fear are recognized as contributing factors that can worsen outcomes. Some people adapt to constant fear by becoming numb to it, at least on the surface. They may stop noticing the physical sensations, but the underlying processes continue. This kind of adaptation can make it harder to recognize when the toll is becoming too high, because there's no dramatic spike in symptoms, just a gradual wearing down. It's important to remember that the fear system is not malfunctioning when this happens. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that it was never meant to operate at this intensity for so long. In an environment where the threats are ongoing or perceived as ongoing, the system has no natural off switch. The effects of chronic fear can also extend beyond the individual. Families and communities living under constant threat, whether from violence, poverty, discrimination, or other sources, can experience collective strain. This can manifest in higher rates of illness, reduced trust between members, and difficulty planning for the future. The toll of fear at this scale can shape entire generations. Understanding this cost doesn't make fear go away, but it does highlight why managing it matters. When fear serves its original purpose, it's a short-term state that keeps you safe. When it outstays its welcome, it begins to chip away at the very health and well-being it was meant to protect. When fear lingers, it can start to feel like an indistinct shape in the mind, something large, looming, and hard to define. The details blur, and all that's left is the weight of it, the pressure it puts on choices and movements. Unmasking it means bringing it into focus, seeing exactly what it is and what it isn't. It's not about removing fear completely. That isn't possible and wouldn't be wise. It's about stripping away the parts that don't serve you, the exaggerated edges, the false alarms that keep the system running long after they're needed. The first step in unmasking fear is noticing when it appears. That might sound obvious, but fear isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with a pounding heart or trembling hands. Sometimes it shows up as hesitation, as a reason you give yourself for delaying something important, as an urge to keep everything exactly as it is because change feels uncertain. These quieter forms can be harder to spot, but they're part of the same system. Paying attention to the body can help reveal these moments. A sudden tension in the shoulders, a tightness in the chest, a shift in breathing. These are small signs that the system has been activated. Noticing them in real time can create a space between the signal and the reaction. In that space, you have a chance to ask what's really happening. Is there an actual threat here, or is this the system misfiring? Is the risk physical, or is it social, emotional, or entirely imagined? Once fear is noticed, the next step is naming it. Giving it specific words changes how the brain processes it. I'm scared is different from I'm worried about forgetting my lines, or I'm nervous about being judged. The general statement keeps the fear vague, while the specific one frames it as something concrete. The more clearly it's defined, the easier it is to evaluate whether the response is proportionate to the situation. This is where perspective becomes important. The fear system doesn't distinguish between a threat that could injure you physically and one that might only cause temporary embarrassment. Both can trigger the same cascade of responses. By looking at the fear from a more analytical angle, you can start to adjust the reaction. This doesn't make the fear disappear, but it can reduce its intensity, giving you more room to choose how to act. Exposure is one of the most studied methods for reshaping fear responses. The principle is simple: gradually and safely encounter the thing you fear until the system stops treating it as dangerous. This process works because it allows the brain to update its threat assessment based on new information. If you repeatedly face a feared situation without harm, the amygdala and related circuits begin to respond less strongly. Over time, the system learns that this particular trigger is safe, or at least safer than it once believed. The key to effective exposure is pacing. Moving too quickly can overwhelm the system and reinforce the fear rather than reduce it. Moving too slowly can allow avoidance to take hold again. The balance is in finding a level of challenge that's uncomfortable but manageable, allowing progress without flooding the system. This is why exposure is often guided in therapeutic settings. Someone else can help judge when to take the next step. Alongside exposure, reframing the meaning of fear can change how it's experienced. If fear is always seen as a signal to stop, it limits possibilities. If it's also seen as a signal of importance, a sign that you're about to do something that matters to you, it can become a source of energy rather than just a warning. This shift doesn't erase the discomfort, but it changes its role. Instead of being an obstacle, it becomes a companion on the way to something valuable. Another part of unmasking fear is understanding the stories that sustain it. The mind builds narratives around fear, what it means, what will happen if it comes true, what it says about you. These stories can be persuasive because they feel like facts, but when they're examined closely, they often contain assumptions or exaggerations. Questioning these elements can loosen their hold. Asking, "What's the evidence for this?" or "Has this always been true?" can reveal gaps that fear has filled in without proof. Breathing and grounding techniques can help during moments when fear feels overwhelming. Slow, deep breaths signal to the body that it's safe to shift out of high alert. Focusing on physical sensations, the feel of your feet on the floor, the texture of an object in your hand, the sounds in the room, can anchor you in the present moment. These practices don't solve the underlying cause of fear, but they can reduce the immediate intensity, making it easier to think clearly. It's important to remember that unmasking fear isn't about being fearless. The goal is to work with the system rather than against it, to understand when it's giving you useful information and when it's holding you back. Fear has kept humans alive for millions of years. It's not an enemy to be defeated, but a tool to be used wisely. Sometimes unmasking fear reveals that it's not about the current situation at all. It might be tied to past experiences, even ones that seem unrelated on the surface. In these cases, the system has learned to associate certain cues, a place, a sound, a type of interaction, with danger, even if the original danger is long gone. Recognizing these connections can open the way to breaking them, replacing old associations with new, safer ones. Unmasking also means acknowledging when fear is valid. Not every fear is exaggerated or misplaced. Some reflect real risks that need to be addressed. The process of examining fear should include deciding whether action is necessary to reduce the danger, whether through planning, seeking support, or making changes to the environment. In this way, unmasking becomes a process of sorting, keeping the fears that serve you and reshaping or letting go of the ones that don't. When fear is seen clearly, it loses some of its power to control. It may still appear, but it no longer drives every decision. This shift can feel like regaining space in your life. Space to try things, to make mistakes, to move toward what matters even when it's uncomfortable. Over time, the system becomes more flexible, able to activate when needed and stand down when not. There are fears you can name, ones that fit into neat categories: fear of heights, of spiders, of speaking in public. There are fears you can trace to specific events or inherited patterns, fears that shrink when examined closely or fade with exposure. But beneath all of these lies something deeper, something more persistent. It isn't about any single object or situation. It's about the fact that life itself has an endpoint, and that no amount of preparation or control can remove that truth. This is the fear you can't escape. It shows up in subtle ways for most people, not always as a conscious thought about mortality, but as a restlessness, a drive to keep busy, a discomfort with stillness. For some, it's the unease that creeps in during the quiet moments, when distractions fall away and there's nothing left to do but sit with the awareness that time is passing. For others, it arrives as sudden flashes during a close call in traffic, a health scare, or the loss of someone close. This fear is unique because it isn't triggered by an immediate danger you can avoid. You can't run from it, fight it, or bargain it away. The mind knows that one day the body will stop and everything familiar will end. For many, this awareness is pushed to the background most of the time, but it never disappears completely. It's woven into the human condition, the price of knowing more than other species about the limits of life, Throughout history, cultures have developed ways to manage this awareness. Rituals, beliefs about an afterlife, philosophical frameworks. All of these serve to give shape to something that otherwise feels vast and formless. Some find comfort in the idea of continuity beyond death. Others in the belief that life's finiteness makes it more valuable. In both cases, the aim is to live with the knowledge rather than be paralyzed by it. From a psychological perspective, the fear of death can influence behavior in ways that aren't immediately obvious. People may choose careers, relationships, or creative projects as a way to leave something lasting behind. This drive for legacy can be a powerful motivator, shaping the course of an entire life without the person ever naming its source. On the other side, some people respond to this fear by avoiding long-term commitments, focusing instead on immediate pleasures or experiences. Both approaches are attempts to manage the discomfort of knowing life's boundaries. The body reacts to reminders of mortality much like it does to other threats. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, attention narrows. Even if the danger isn't immediate, the system treats the thought of it as important. In research settings, subtle reminders of death, such as passing by a cemetery or reading about an accident, can shift how people behave. They might become more protective of their cultural values, more supportive of their social groups, or more wary of outsiders. This suggests that the fear you can't escape doesn't just live in the background. It can quietly shape social dynamics and decision-making. Children encounter this fear differently. At first, they may not fully grasp the permanence of death. As they grow and their understanding deepens, the realization can bring both curiosity and anxiety. How adults respond to their questions often sets the tone for how they manage the awareness later in life. Avoiding the topic can make it seem more frightening, while open, age-appropriate conversations can help integrate it into their worldview in a less threatening way. For some, this fear becomes sharper during transitions, moving to a new stage of life, seeing signs of aging or facing health changes. These moments act as reminders that time is moving in one direction. Even without conscious focus, the milestones of birthdays, anniversaries, and seasonal cycles can stir an undercurrent of unease. It's not that these events are unpleasant, often they're celebrated. But they also carry the quiet truth that each one marks another step along a finite path. Avoidance is one common strategy for dealing with the fear you can't escape. Filling life with constant activity, entertainment, or work can keep the awareness at bay. For others, the strategy is to confront it directly, through meditation on impermanence, through conversations about mortality, or through experiences that bring them close to danger in a controlled way. Neither approach eliminates the fear entirely, but each can change its intensity and influence. There's an argument to be made that this fear, while uncomfortable, is also part of what gives life its structure. If time were endless, urgency might fade. Decisions could be postponed indefinitely. The knowledge that moments are limited can push people to act, to connect, to create, to seek meaning. It can make small joys more vivid, because they are fleeting. That doesn't mean the fear is always productive. For some, it becomes overwhelming, leading to a constant search for reassurance or a pattern of avoiding anything that might remind them of life's limits. In these cases, the fear can feed anxiety disorders, health obsessions, or phobias. The same system that can motivate can also constrain. Therapeutic approaches to this deeper fear often focus on acceptance, not in the sense of resignation, but in the sense of allowing the awareness to exist without trying to erase it. Practices like mindfulness can help by keeping attention on the present, reducing the tendency to spiral into imagined futures. Some find value in philosophical reflection, exploring questions about what makes a life meaningful in light of its limits. Others turn to spiritual or religious frameworks that offer a narrative beyond individual existence. No single method works for everyone. For some, the fear you can't escape is a quiet companion, present but not disruptive. For others, it's a recurring visitor that demands attention, especially in moments of vulnerability. Learning to live with it is less about silencing it and more about changing the relationship to it, seeing it as a reminder of what matters rather than as an intruder to be expelled. Even when it's uncomfortable, this fear can clarify priorities. It can nudge people toward repairing relationships, taking risks that align with their values, or savouring ordinary moments. It can remind them to look up from the routines of daily life and notice where they are in the arc of their own story. And perhaps most importantly, it's a fear shared by everyone, regardless of background, culture, or belief. The universality of it can create a quiet solidarity, the recognition that, in this one thing, no one is alone. Every person walking the earth carries some awareness of it, and every person shapes their life around it in ways big and small. After walking through so many shapes and shades of fear, from the flicker of a sudden noise to the deep, steady hum of what we know we can't change, it's natural to feel the weight of it still somewhere in the body. The shoulders may be a little tense, the breath may have shifted, the mind may still be turning over one image or idea that stood out along the way. It's worth noticing these things now, without trying to push them away. This is part of the return, not leaping out of the experience as though it never happened, but carrying a clearer understanding back with you. There's no rule that says fear has to vanish for you to feel calm again. In fact, it rarely works that way. The system that responds to danger is not a switch that can be flipped from on to off. It's more like a tide that rises and falls. When you let it recede naturally, without fighting the current, you give your body and mind the space to reset. That's what we're doing now, allowing the tide to go out. As it does, you might notice the way your surroundings feel more solid again. The floor beneath you, the chair or bed supporting you, the air on your skin. You may notice sounds that had faded into the background while your focus was turned inward. The hum of something electrical, the distant passing of a car, the small movements of the building around you. Each of these is a reminder that you're here, in a real place, in this particular moment. The journey through fear isn't meant to leave you stuck in it. The point of exploring it in detail, the biology, the history, the psychology, the personal and universal, is to make it less of a vague, looming shadow. Now it's something you've seen from many angles. You know how it starts, how it moves through the body, how it can fade, and how it sometimes lingers. You've seen that it's not one single thing, but many patterns woven together over time. In that sense, fear becomes less like a monster hiding in the dark and more like a weather system. It moves in, changes the light, shifts the air, and then moves on. Sometimes it comes back in familiar ways, sometimes it surprises you, but it's never the only condition you'll experience. Other patterns, joy, curiosity, connection, are just as real and just as capable of shaping your life. As the rhythm of your breathing returns to its own steady pace, you might think about how the fear system is, at its core, an act of care. It's your body watching over you, ready to move, ready to protect. Even when it misfires or overstays its welcome, it's trying to keep you safe. Understanding it this way can soften how you respond to it in the future. Instead of seeing it as an enemy, you might see it as an overprotective friend who sometimes needs to be reminded that you're okay. In the quieter space that follows this long exploration, there's room for a gentler kind of noticing. You might become aware of the small, ordinary things that are here right now. The texture of fabric, the pattern of light through a window, the warmth of your own skin. These details often get lost when fear is loud, but they're part of what makes the present moment worth coming back to. If any of what we've covered tonight lingers with you, let it do so without urgency. You don't have to solve it or act on it immediately. The mind often works in the background, making connections and adjustments long after you've stopped consciously thinking about something. In the same way, the body adjusts too, tension releasing in small increments, breath settling into deeper cycles, heart rate easing without effort. If you're listening to this as part of your routine before rest, this is the point where you can simply let your thoughts drift. You've given your mind a lot to hold tonight, but now it doesn't need to hold it all at once. Let it set some of it down, If sleep comes, let it come without chasing it. If you stay awake, that's fine too. Just rest in the comfort of being still for a while. If you've been listening during the day, then this return is about stepping back into whatever comes next with a little more perspective. You might notice that the pace of things feels different, that you're carrying a bit more space inside yourself than before. Even a slight shift in how you hold fear can change the way you move through the world. And before we close, take a moment to recognize that you've spent this time looking directly at something many people prefer to avoid. You've traced it from its ancient origins to the present moment, through the body, the mind, and the shared human experience. That willingness to look, to stay with it instead of turning away, is a kind of quiet strength. So as we finish, there's no need to make any grand conclusion or final statement. Just a gentle reminder that fear is part of you, but it's not the whole of you. It will visit and it will pass, and you'll meet it again with the same awareness you've practiced here. And when you return to your life after this, you can carry that understanding with you, not as a shield against every possible danger, but as a way of walking through whatever comes next with steadier steps. And that's where we'll leave things for now. If you found something here that made you feel calmer, more curious, or simply more at ease with the strange and complicated ways fear moves through life, you're welcome to come back to this whenever you need. If you'd like to hear more quiet explorations like this, you can subscribe or just keep this space in mind for when you're ready to settle in again. For now, you don't need to hold on to anything, not the details, not the weight of the topic, not even the sound of my voice. Let it all fade in its own time, and take with you only what feels light enough to carry. Thank you for spending this time here. Rest well, and take care of yourself.